we go. All right, greetings and welcome to the mock selection committee here on the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast YouTube stream. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Dorn, the co-host of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast. That sounds like a great podcast. I got to check it out sometime. We've got Bracketville's Dave Oman, the Bracketeer, Rocco Miller, Made for March, Anthony Valentino will be with us shortly. He's got some parenting to deal with. I understand that entirely. And Matt Browning, who we're going to need a good title for you by the end of this. You're just the new guy for now, but
New
we're
guy's
happy to
fine.
have you
Let's go
with
with that.
us. The new guy. It was a good movie. So the plan for tonight, I don't know how well anybody can see the whiteboard here. I had to bring out the whiteboard for the big mock committee, but we already have 30 teams in our field. We went through the process. We kind of cheated a little bit from what the committee does. They do it's a ballot of 24 teams and then everybody else under consideration. And as long as it's I think 9 out of the 12 that are on the 24, they get selected. We went with 32, and anybody that was unanimously in those 32 is immediately in the field, and we ended up with 30. In addition to all the 16 teams that were in the top 16 reveal, we had Alabama, Arkansas, BYU, Clemson, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisville, Miami, Florida, North Carolina, St. Mary's, St. John's, Tennessee, Villanova, and Wisconsin. And that is the last time we will mention those teams tonight. We'll get into them tomorrow with the seeding. We're jumping right in on our ballot of the next 8 teams to be considered for selection. Most likely all 8 of these teams will ultimately get in, but I'm going to put the spreadsheet up. And what we're doing a little bit differently from before is everyone has been assigned a certain number of teams. You can see up at the top here who the initials are. We'll be starting out with MB, so Matt Browning on Iowa, and we're just going to do like a quick 1-minute recap of each of these teams, just so we're not so there's some structure to this. So Matt, if you want to get us going on our Iowa introduction.
So Iowa's metrics, pretty solid. Resume average of 37.7, predictives of 27. They have 2 quad 1A wins, 3-7 versus the first quadrant altogether. The quad 1A wins are Nebraska at home and then at Indiana. The quad 2 loss and a quad 3 loss. That quad 3 loss is at Penn State. Non-conference strength of schedule of 299, and their best non-conference win was a neutral against Grand Canyon. So a lot left to be desired, I guess, with the actual wins, but the metrics are pretty solid for Iowa.
All right, Graham, you ready to go on Missouri?
Yeah, I think when you look at Missouri, nice average between strength of record and WAB coming in at 34.5 between those two. 46.7 efficiency average is a little bit concerning. They do have 2 elite wins. They beat Florida at home, also won at Kentucky. Those really stand out. And that's amongst 5 quadrant 1 wins in the first place. Pretty good there. On the downside, only 12 wins against the first 3 quadrants, which is a little bit low for a team in the tournament. One thing that does stand out for Missouri on the metrics that I think does help them a little bit is the loss to Kansas is actually considered a road loss instead of a neutral court loss. So that actually helped their WAB and their strength of record a little bit, which is, I think, beneficial. That game was in Kansas City. They did have Stone out for part of the year, and I think that injury could be factored in to how Missouri is seeded.
All right, back to Matt for the Wolfpack of North Carolina State.
Kind of like Iowa, metrics are pretty solid. Resume average of 37.3, predictive 34.7. They're 2-5 versus quad 1A. Those wins are at Clemson and at SMU. Overall, they're 4-7 versus the first quadrant. They have a quad 4 loss, though, against Georgia Tech. Not a good loss there. The non-conference, they scheduled really well. It's 38, but not much to show for it. A neutral against Boise State is their best win in a non-conference. So they're a lot like Iowa to me, in that they except for the non-conference part, but they have a couple quad 1 wins, a couple quad 1A wins, but there's just a lot left to be desired when it comes to the actual results of who the Wolfpack beat.
It is interesting thus far. All three of these teams, their 5 best wins were all in conference. None of them were exactly non-conference warriors. Dave, I mean, take a deep breath, clear your throat. You got 3 straight teams coming up. Let's start you out with the Billikens of St. Louis.
Okay, well, St. Louis has been pretty consistent most of the year. Best wins, that's maybe a little bit of a concern that their best wins are Santa Clara and VCU twice, which depending on, how things finish out, they could either be towards the bottom of the field or just miss, and that could leave St. Louis potentially without a win over the field. They have a poor non-conference strength of schedule above 300. Their metrics do help them, obviously. They're pretty solid in both their resume and their predictives, particularly given the lack of big wins. So I think that, they only have 3 wins against the top 50. And again, we mentioned who those were. Kind of moving on to UCF, they've been up and down. Had some big wins at home early. Then they did get that one big road win at BYU, although BYU obviously was without one of their key players in that one. They do have 4 losses right now to teams that likely will be outside the field. But those wins, against Kansas and Texas Tech will look pretty good at the end of the day. And so I would say they just got to kind of finish up where they are. And then the last on my list, I think coming up is SMU, correct?
TCU.
Oh, TCU. Okay, they're later. TCU, they're really coming on right now, playing much better. Resume metrics have improved. Obviously, that big win against Texas Tech on the road to go along with wins over Florida and Iowa State. The only knock really on TCU is that they didn't have a great start to the year. 4 losses to non-tournament teams, including that really bad loss early in the opener against New Orleans. But all in all, 3 quad 1A wins. And right now, as of this evening, those 3 are all in the top 15 of the net as well. So that's sort of where their strengths are.
Throw it back to Matt for the Bruins of UCLA. Matt, you are on mute.
Rookie error, my fault, my bad. Resume average 36.7 for the Bruins, predictive 29. They have 3 quad 1A wins: home against Purdue, home against Illinois, home against Nebraska. They're 4-8 versus the first quadrant. They have losses neutral to Cal and at Minnesota, so not nearly as bad as the losses that NC State or Iowa had, but nonetheless still have some losses there. Their non-conference strength of schedule is 160. But much like the other 2 teams I discussed earlier, their best wins were in conference because their best non-con win was home against Arizona State.
Yep. A lot of that on this section of the bracket. And Rocco, bring us home with the Aggies of Utah State.
Yeah, the Utah State Aggies very much allergic to the Rebels of UNLV, swept by UNLV by double digits in both contests. That's the latest news with the Aggies. They maintain a top 40 resume, strength in terms of all the power numbers. You look at the body of work, a road win at New Mexico and a neutral court win in Dallas versus the VCU Rams are the 2 main ones that could be wins against the field. Obviously, both of those squads are in very much limbo near the cut line, could be in, could be out. Overall, 3-4 against quad 1, with a quad 2 loss and one of the UNLV games and a quad 3 loss, the other UNLV game. So that makes it fun. But I think you look at the overall wins above bubble at 36, their worst of the resume measurements are strength of resume at 41. Clearly a team, similar to last year, to where they have a matchup zone that was very effective for 3 months, and the rest of the Mountain West has really started to key in on where they can expose that. And now it's Utah State's turn to adjust as we get down the stretch with 1 regular season game to go and an entire Mountain West tournament. But overall, it's a team that, much like St. Louis, has been great most of the year and just really going through a rough couple of weeks here late.
It is fun that if they were to beat New Mexico, I guess that's on Saturday, it's
Yes.
probably going to be Utah State against 8 seed UNLV in the Mountain West second round. Bring it
Maybe.
on. give them the 3-game sweep for UNLV.
Very possible.
All right,
Very possible.
all right. We can go anywhere within these 8 now. We've got our intro done. Any questions in the chat, please throw them out. I'm keeping an eye on that. Matt's going to periodically remind us to tweet some things. If anybody's feeling so inclined that they want to send tips our way, I've put Graham's Venmo information on there. We'll share that 6 ways at the end of this whole endeavor, and maybe those of us who still have wives by the end of this will be able to take them out for dinner if you guys are generous enough with us. But who in this team or in this range do we want to go with first? Anthony's still taking his time getting on here. We gotta get made for March in the mix. Graham, who do you want to go to first?
I'd like to go to UCF just because they've been sliding. I know I had a lot of comments on my Twitter feed from UCF fans that were offended that I did not lock them after they won that game against BYU. They thought for sure there's nothing that can happen that would put their tournament bid at risk. And I said, well, actually, you guys have 3 games against non-tournament teams to end the year. Something could still go wrong, and it started to go wrong. So I think UCF would be an interesting discussion point because we always knew the predictives indicated that a slide was possible. And now I'm really starting to wonder how much of that big road win at BYU was BYU not having Richie Saunders as opposed to UCF just being excellent.
Yeah, I think UCF is a good starting point just on bracketology in general, right? How to combine the pretty good wins above bubble, solid resume metrics with Ken Palm tells us they're barely a top 50 team. So I think this is indicative of how things are now. I mean, we don't have anybody outside of Miami, Ohio, too glaring differences between their resume metrics and predictive metrics. But UCF has been kind of that resume metrics darling all year long. And now that they've taken some losses, those resume metrics are starting to slip. I mean, I think they were around 21, 22 there for a while, and now they're down in the upper 30s. Well, I guess lower 30s, 31. What is that? Upper or lower? But yeah, they're most likely still going to make the tournament as long as they don't completely continue to poop the bed.
Well, there's only 2 more beds available to poop, Kerry.
Right.
That's the key. This is one of the few examples where the finish line is it's a save by the bell situation if you're from space U. And I think, Jermichael Stillwell getting hobbled up at the end of that BYU win is a bigger deal than I think people are talking about because he's so tough. He decided to play both against Baylor and Oak State. Did log a lot of minutes against Oak State, but I know the kid really well from when he played at Milwaukee, interviewed him multiple times. And without a fully healthy Jermichael Stillwell, he's the engine that makes this team possible. He's one of the most elite rebounders in the nation. He's been that way since he played in the Horizon League. And I think the other thing to note as well for at least the first loss to Baylor, less of an excuse for Oklahoma State, is we've been studying a lot of data over these first couple of years of super conferences. And the overwhelming trend has been if you go west for 2 games and then come home, it's actually the game when you come home that we're seeing the most consistent amount of poor performances. And so there's their excuse for the Baylor loss. It was still only a 1-point loss. I thought they were also on the flip side of that advantage for being able to hang out in Utah for 4 to 5 days. By the time they played BYU, they had already played Utah. They're out there adjusted to the altitude. They don't have the same level of challenges. They clearly played their best game of the year, up by almost 30. Actually, they were up by 30 at different points of that game. And it's a big part of their recent story, those factors. But I think that win at BYU is the one that basically had a lot of us saying, okay, regardless of how many more beds there's left to poop, this team will still find their way in the bracket.
I like your point there about the teams struggle coming back home after that West Coast trip. I noticed that with Clemson.
Yes.
Clemson and Duke are the only teams that went to Cal and Stanford and won both games. And Clemson came back home and immediately lost 4 straight, including 3 to teams that might not make the tournament. Like they got those, West Coast. What's popular food out West Coast? They got the rice-a-roni out there. I don't know. And then they came home and they just blew it.
Yeah, my honest opinion as a traveler from out here is it's always harder to go east because you lose a couple hours. It's just tougher to get back on a normal schedule. You're guaranteed on the travel back for the teams located in the east to lose a night of sleep or whatever it may be. And these guys are regimented athletes, and so it's a little tough to adjust to. And when you're on the East Coast in the ACC or even the Big 12 in this example, the Big 10 has the example you're having to go right back to work pretty quickly with a tough game, and that's just proven to be a lot. We just saw SMU as well. They're not as far away, but they are two time zones. Time zone is really the key data point here in the study. They go home and they drop a home game to Miami. Again, that might not be as related. Miami's a very good team, but just another example. Wake Forest last year, bubble team, came out here, won both games against Cal and Stanford, came home and laid an egg against a really bad Florida State team. That's one that really stands out.
Imagine if Boise State was in the Big East right now. Maybe they'd be losing to teams even worse than Hawaii Pacific with all that travel. I think we should touch on St. Louis because I think most of the teams in this group we're pretty confident are going to get in. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about them in the 31 to 38 range if we didn't have them here. But St. Louis, if they were to lose what they're at George Mason on Saturday, I mean, we're not trying to project forward, but I think it is with St. Louis. It's an interesting one because I mean the A10 final is going to be on Sunday afternoon. That's probably not really going to be factored in. I think what they do, what their final regular season resume is what the committee is going to be evaluating first and foremost, and probably last. So if they were to lose that game, how would we view them differently? Because it's a tough game, but it does not look like a tough game on the resume. Like that's like New Mexico losing to Colorado State the other night. Like kind of the inverse though. Mason's fading. They used to be good, but that's a tough out for them.
I still think St. Louis is in pretty good condition at that point. We don't know what the bubble's going to look like. We don't know how many bid thieves there's going to be. A couple of years ago, all of a sudden we had our playing games on the 10 line. That doesn't really happen, but it can. And that's a good reminder that when we're talking about teams being locks, you never know where that bubble cut line is going to end up. And I think with St. Louis, though, when I look at what they've done against Q1 and Q2, yeah, it hasn't been the strongest wins. We're not going to say that they've had, top level wins. That's obviously not the case. But I am very impressed with what they did, sweeping VCU and beating Santa Clara on a neutral floor, close game, tight game. But they did get the victory there. If it comes down to them getting on the bubble against teams like Santa Clara and VCU, I think they're in good shape in that scenario. So I feel pretty good about St. Louis just because if they fall to the bubble, they have head-to-head comparisons against some teams they'd be going up against.
Anyone else got thoughts on SLU?
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is I generally, with the numbers that they have with their net and some of the other metrics, I think that they're holding in a pretty good spot if the committee, at least from the metrical side, holds that weight like they did last year. But I do go back to the fact that if, this is it's like their own worst thing, because if they beat VCU a third time, obviously if they meet in the championship, then it doesn't really matter. But if VCU doesn't make the tournament and Santa Clara ultimately doesn't make the tournament, and if they lose to somebody else along the way, all of a sudden you're looking at a team that potentially beat no one who's in the field. And that, I don't know that they're with their metrics that would slide them enough, but it could definitely drop their seed down and could create a potential issue if things really got tight. I mean, that's just the way I would look at it when you're looking at a team we were just talking about, UCF, and they've got wins over Texas Tech, Kansas, Texas A&M, TCU, BYU. Even if Texas A&M falters and falls out, then they're looking at 4 wins against the field versus a St. Louis team that has none. So that's, I think, where it could still potentially get a little interesting for St. Louis. Although, again, if the committee holds what they like their metrics, and they like what those things say about him, then I think St. Louis is in pretty good shape regardless.
Yeah, just to echo what everybody else is saying here, the wins over Santa Clara and VCU, who are below St. Louis on my seed list, it would take something catastrophic, I think, for St. Louis not to make it. There's so many teams between where they are and then the last team in. And even if for some reason both Santa Clara and VCU don't get in, I still think there's enough to what St. Louis tried to do and the non-conference and what they did do against teams that were close to the field. That to me would be a difference maker in putting them in or out. But again, it's going to take something pretty catastrophic, I think, for St. Louis to not be in the bracket come Selection Sunday.
Anthony, welcome to the party. Is everybody asleep now?
The individual that I was responsible for is asleep now. That's the main concern here. Sorry, guys.
Well, and I think
Oh,
the
you're
only thing
fine.
I would add to what Matt was saying is that I think there's also some value in just the overall excellence that St. Louis has had from start to finish with just 3 losses. And while quad 3 usually are not tournament level wins, they have a lot of those, and they have a lot of other quad 2 wins. So I think Matt's right on. I mean, I get a little bit nervous anytime a team has not beaten anybody that's in the field, if it gets close, but I think his point's well taken with their metrics and stuff. If those hold, it's going to be hard to see them falling far enough to get all the way out unless some really strange things happen.
The only real risk I see for them is if they lose to Mason, they could get Fordham in their first game. That is the team I would not want to play if I was them, because any other game, I think they're fine. It's kind of like what happened to West Virginia drawing Colorado last year. Sometimes if you're already in, you just want to get the hardest game imaginable so you can't possibly do enough damage to leave.
On that note, question from Andrew Schaefer, 421. If Utah State loses to New Mexico and then loses again to UNLV in the Mountain West tournament, how far would they fall? And then he asks, last 4 in. I'm thinking more first 4 out at that point. Throw it to the group.
It would be tough to leave out. It would be tough to leave out a 24-8 Mountain West team with 14 wins in the league and a pretty strong non-conference where they went 10-1 if you count, of course, the late season Memphis win. I think that the first 4 is probably more realistic. It's hard to imagine Utah State falling all the way out with all the good they've done. So we'll see how it shakes out. Obviously, the surprises control all those spots, but I feel like 6 or 7 spots would have to be gobbled up for Utah State to fall out. They've just been way too solid throughout the year. I think with Utah State, they just, the UNLV thing might help them in a weird way because the committee could look at that as a matchup problem. That'd be 3 losses to the same team. So if you take the UNLV games out, now all of a sudden they're 24-5 again. So every once in a while you can look at it that way. It's up to the person. Not every person will, but there's a lot of different ways you can spin it. And I do think the first 4 is very much in play, though. We saw just 2 tournaments ago, very surprisingly, 2 Mountain West teams sent to the first 4 that I think we all agreed that year they'd be above the first 4. So, nothing surprises me with the Mountain West, but they're usually still pretty good about getting the right teams in the field from this league.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The committee will select teams from Mountain West. They'll just seed them brutally. So, yeah,
I think the commissioner wants the extra finances, so they don't mind the first 4 from a league perspective. Yeah.
Anybody else got thoughts on Utah State before we have our first vote? All right. All right. If everybody's got their sheet open, see a couple of you guys in there. It should be ready to go with votes. If anybody wants to throw out questions, I'll be ready to field those while we kind of quietly do our voting.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add on Utah State since we were just talking about them. If they were to lose to Wyoming, which is probably the 8-9 game as for what we know right now, UNLV Wyoming, which is very possible. I think that actually is worse because now you have a new quad 3 team that beat you. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think we'd have to kind of re-explore if they lost to like a Wyoming there. And their fans really bring it to Vegas. I think I'll actually be at that game. So
Curious if anybody wants to just share some thoughts on UCLA here, so we're not just sitting here in dead air. Personally, I'm pretty sure I was by far the lowest of anybody in the group on the Bruins uh, in our initial ballot. I just didn't want to move them up too far for a home win over Nebraska. I think the fact that all they have is 3 wins away from home against, I believe it's Washington, Oregon, and Penn State. That's a big concern for me, at least seed wise. Maybe not selection wise, but if they were to lose at USC this weekend, I think that road neutral record becomes a major problem for them.
I agree with that. I just don't see them losing to USC at this point without Baker Mazara. My Huskies pounded USC last night, and
Yeah.
and we're not a good team. But we'll see. You know, UCLA USC rivalry is no love lost. They really get after each other. It's just USC's. You know, they're all the freshmen now, Arenas, and they're playing guys like Ryan Cornish. And I know this is about UCLA. I'm just saying USC is depending on guys they had no interest in playing earlier this year. Now they have to play them. It's a nice little setup for UCLA, and they've been really good at home. I mean, that 20-point win against Nebraska beautified a lot of parts of their concerning profile, you know, especially the power numbers. So that did a lot of helping for them. They've been a much different team in Westwood versus away from Westwood. Clearly not winning, you know, not beating really anybody away from home that's worth a pulse. But they're getting away with it because they got the Purdue win. They pounded Nebraska, squeaked out Wisconsin, right? So it's a formula that works, unfortunately, these days.
Yeah, I think on the UCLA note, I actually ranked them a little bit lower in my vote here than I would have if we were doing a seeding vote for that reason, right? You don't win away from home. I'm more concerned about whether you deserve to be in the field than I would be if I was seeding, where I think you deserve to be in the field at that stage. So I don't know. That's one of those process things that I think a lot of people don't really think about, but that is something the committee does. They select the teams and then they seed the teams, and they are two separate processes.
One thing with
Yes.
UCLA that's interesting is road records always catch my eye. Always. I think, especially at the back end of the field, it is a really easy thing to pick out. We've had some pretty bad road records in the past few years make it on the 8, 9, probably more like 9, 10 onwards line. But the one that always sticks out, which I think gives me some maybe hope for UCLA to maybe stay in that 8, 9 range, is 3 years ago, Maryland, I think, was 2-9 on the road. And they ended up getting an 8 seed. And their 2 wins on the road were against Minnesota and Louisville. And that was not the Pat Kelsey Louisville. That was the Kenny Payne Louisville. I think both of those teams had less than 9 wins on the season the entire year. So there is some precedent for them getting to that threshold. I mean, they have an extra win more than Maryland already. I don't remember Maryland's neutral record off the top of my head, but I don't know. I think there's precedent for them to be on the 8, 9 line, even if they probably still need to beat USC, but even if they bounce in the first round of the Big Ten tournament after that, I think they can get there depending on what happens around them.
Well, it's just a question of what the committee values, right? Like, so are they going to
Yeah.
focus more on that road neutral record? Are they going to look at the elite home wins? I mean, there's two sides of that coin there. I mean, for me, I have UCLA a little higher than everybody else does. Well, I guess that's true. I'm looking at the vote now. I guess I don't, but still, I thought I had a little higher than you all did. But because I like those 3 home wins because it's more than what some of those other teams like Iowa or NC State have. They've got wins against teams right now. For me, they're all in the top 12 on the seed list.
Yeah, what UCLA reminds me of is that, and it's a weakened version of it, but they remind me of Clemson from last year. Clemson's big wins were Duke and Kentucky, and they did not get a single win against the field away from home on a road court, and they still got a 5 seed. So the committee is willing to overlook that stuff if you have truly elite wins. And I think UCLA's wins, they may be at home, but
They're
those are
elite.
truly elite wins.
Absolutely.
And as Graham always says, how can you be able to be expected to win on a neutral court if you can't defend your home turf? That is something that Graham said a few years ago that always stuck with me.
Yeah, I just think
Being
it's
sarcastic.
Something
debatable.
good.
I'm being
I,
sarcastic on that.
I think it's just debatable that Purdue and Nebraska are truly elite. Like, I definitely have my concerns about both of them, but UCLA gets away with it in the eyes of the committee. I agree because they are still top 12, uh, big board teams, seedless teams. But it's UCLA does seem like they're getting away with a little bit of murder here. They've played better, I'll admit. Like when they finally started letting run. They basically had him in a cage for the first 3 months, not letting him
Yeah.
be himself, and that's why his numbers really stunk. But the last month they've turned Dent loose, and that's freed up a lot of guys. Bilodeau is amazing. They are playing better basketball, and they should get credit for that.
I'm just kind of
All
be
right.
curious. Go ahead, Kerry.
Go ahead.
No, I
Oh,
was
I
just
was
going
just
to say,
gonna. um, I was gonna just chime in. We got a question from Matt Katabayan in the chat. How big of an issue is it that USU didn't play a power team in non-conference? And I don't think it's a big deal at all. I think they scheduled very well in the RPI days. They played a lot of like-minded mid-majors. I think that's more so than the fact that Miami, Ohio didn't play like, they didn't get a call back from Pitt or Michigan State or Wisconsin or whatever, but they also didn't play the San Diego States and stuff. I think that's the problem people have with Miami, Ohio. At least Utah State played other quality mid majors. And Memphis is
Yeah, the
basically a
VCU.
major, let's be honest.
Yeah, the VCU game was scheduled intentionally to be a big mid-major plus type game. Obviously, it worked out great for both teams. I mean, even though VCU lost, it's a beneficial game to play, have the opportunity. And I think part of that story, you have to go back to last year's team. Last year, they ended up getting a special neutral site game against Iowa. They completely dominate Iowa in their backyard, and Fred McCaffrey gets let go. So, do you think any power conference teams wanted to sign up to play these guys? I don't think so. So they're their own worst enemy for beating Iowa last year.
You would think if any coach in the world would understand the value added of, when you're a mid major, you got to play somebody. It'd be Ben McCollum after Drake would have been left out if they didn't win the Missouri Valley last year. All right. New guy, you're in charge of drafting a tweet that we'll share, so we remind people that we're doing this, and then we're going to move on to the next group of 9 teams here, not 8. I figure we can talk about all 9, and we're going to start on Auburn with Mr. Made for March, and then I am coming right behind you with Miami, Ohio. So you better do Bruce Pearl proud here.
Oh boy, that's a big one. All right, where do we start with Auburn? So many ways we can go here. Well, 16 and 14. There's not a ton of precedent here for two games over 500. Obviously, they'll have a couple more games left here. But I mean, the argument here for Auburn is the schedule, right? They played the second toughest schedule nationally total and the 17th toughest schedule in the non-conference. This is a very much an argument of, hey, we gave North Carolina a nod on this front last year. Why are we not willing to give Auburn a nod on this front this year? They, the metric profile, so predictive average still has this team inside what you would consider at-large territory at, close to 37. Resume average is leaking closer to the mid 40s at this point. Not a good road record, 2-7 away from home, but they did, potentially get one of the best wins, if not, or at least a top 5 nationally win. I would argue maybe a top 3 nationally win at Florida. I believe the only team to win in Gainesville this year. And if we're going to say, hey, this team can't compete with the big boys, I think it's hard to overlook that result. It's hard to overlook even some of their losses where they played competitively and they nearly beat Houston. They do have a couple of really tough losses in non-conference where they got absolutely pummeled. They got crushed by Michigan. They got crushed by Purdue. Really fun offensive team with Keyshawn Hall and Tahad Pettiford, Kevin Overton too. But the argument here is they played a tough schedule. there'd be a lot of other teams probably in the range of their 16 and 14 or pretty close to it playing that difficult of a schedule. And they still pulled off two quad 1As, including one of the best wins of the year nationally. So that's my take on Auburn. I think I huddled up with Bruce before I had to put the kids down to bed. He said you gotta let Stephen in.
Is that why your kid had trouble falling asleep? Because Bruce
Yeah, I was
probably
telling him
so
about
much.
I was telling him about what Bruce was saying on the phone, and it was very disconcerting.
All right. I have Miami, Ohio next. I should have mentioned we got Iowa, St. Louis, UCF, and UCLA into our field based on that last vote. So now Missouri, NC State, TCU, and Utah State move into the holding zone. They will wage war with whoever's top 4 from this next group. Again, we are kind of cutting some corners compared to how the committee would do it. Technically, right now, we should be picking 8 teams from what's left of our to be selected group, but I'm just kind of using our consensus seed list from beforehand. If there's anybody outside of this 9 who you guys can see, I'll even highlight them in the Google sheet. If there's anybody highlighted in yellow that you really think we should include in this, please let me know and we'll throw them in the mix as well. But I think this is kind of our consensus. Anyway, Miami, Ohio. They are 30-0 or 27-0 if you prefer to remove the non-D1 wins. Either way, it's an O. They're 2 full touchdowns, fewer losses than Auburn has. Prolific offense, no matter what Ken Palm says. I think they're averaging over 90 points per game. Granted, strength of schedule has something to do with that, but even with that, I believe they're top 80 on Ken Palm in offense. The bad here, the strength of schedule overall is 344. The non-conference strength of schedule, 364. I don't even know who is worse, but it might be George Mason, actually. But we had that whole thing from Matt Brown of Extra Points sharing his Freedom of Information Act of all the emails they tried to send to teams this offseason, and nobody would get back to them or accepted their offers. So there's that, whatever you want to do with that. I think every mid-major in the country could share those emails as well if they felt like it. But they do have a 2.49 wins above bubble. That is by far the best of any team in this range that we are considering. Lost them on my list here. No losses, period. NC State, TCU, Cincinnati, and Santa Clara all lost to a quad 4 team. So how easy is it to win all of those games? Clearly it's not. They lost starting point guard Evan Ipsaro right before Christmas. Then they lost replacement starting point guard Luke Skaljak for a game. He's back. There was a report that he broke his wrist. That was bullshit. He's back. He played on Tuesday. He's going to play Friday against Ohio. So
I like that.
yeah. So if they beat Ohio, they got to be in. That's my take on Miami, Ohio. Graham, moving from Miami, Ohio to Ohio State.
Yeah, sticking with the Buckeye State over here, you look at the loss to Pitt, obviously really damages the profile, but that was only by 1 point. They also lost to North Carolina by 1 point. All goes into Ohio State having the 290th luck rating on KenPom. So they've been a little bit of tough luck over the course of the season. Despite that, they're still 9-11 against quads 1 and 2. If you look at their resume average, it's 42.7. But that's actually a little bit better if you take out KPI and just focus on strength of record and WOB. Between those two, it's 39.5. With the predictive average being 28.3, the big win against Purdue at home, I think there's a lot to be happy with considering UCLA is now firmly in the field. So with the Wisconsin win, that's now 3 wins over teams that are firmly in the field. If you want to consider West Virginia as a bubble team, they got that one on a neutral court as well. I think one thing that could potentially hurt Ohio State when we look at them compared to some other teams, their best wins away from home are Northwestern and Oregon is their second best win away from home on a true court. So a true road court. So a little bit of a concern there when it comes to selection.
That's a quad one win in Evanston to you, good sir. But yes, I agree. See a question here from Matt Catabayon on Miami, Ohio. We'll get to that after we go through all these teams. I promise you, we'll have plenty to say on the Red Hawks. Rocco, you're up with Santa Clara.
Yes, the beautiful Broncos of Santa Clara, a team that went 14-0 against every team fourth place or lower in the WCC, something that has not been seen in this league in the recent era. The deepest team that Herb Sendek has had, as somebody who's observed them the last decade. A lot of good teams. Obviously, Jalen Williams, Pod Zemensky came through the program. The big blemish that we talk about is the game that I was actually on the broadcast for, Loyola Chicago out in Santa Cruz. The best I can tell you is that's one of the few games Loyola's had a entirely healthy roster. Justin Moore was tremendous down the stretch. Xavier Amos is an amazing athlete. You saw how he played last night against St. Louis if you were watching that game. But at the end of the day, bracketology doesn't care if you have a $3.5 million roster. Loyola Chicago's still a 302nd ranked net team this morning, and it's one way to pick apart an entire season of mostly good for Santa Clara. But overall, they got one of the St. Mary's wins, the home game, lose both to Gonzaga. They go 1-3 in the Big Four, as we call it out here in the West. And in the non-conference, this Santa Clara squad was able to go and get a game in the Big East. Probably won't happen again after this, much to the Utah State example of last year. And they go to Xavier, and they had a 40-point lead. They end up winning by 18. But if you watch the game, they were completely dominant, made a huge statement. And I think they've been on everybody's radar since. Over the course of the year, they were able to pick up 3 more quadrant 2 wins against their rivals, San Francisco, a much improved Pacific team, and a win up at Washington State. They have a 10-6 overall record away from the Levy Center, and they only have 2 losses overall against teams not going to the tournament. So they've been nearly perfect. I feel very good about them compared to a lot of the bubble personally, but they obviously have a couple ways you could pick them apart. Their one tournament level win was at home, and they have the Loyola Chicago bad loss. They'll open up in the WCC tournament Sunday night against likely Seattle or Pacific, 2 dangerous teams in the league, I might add. I doubt they'll play LMU or San Diego, but for the sake of the exercise, it is possible with the bracket.
Yeah, it sucks that we won't have the WCC final by the time we're done. Would have at least been nice to have seen the Santa Clara St. Mary's game, assuming we get that semifinal. But they should have won the game against St. Louis too. Boy, what a difference that would have made for both of those
Right.
teams.
Great game too. The high level game.
Yeah.
If you watch that game, you're like, I'm sure the announcers were saying it like, oh, this is an NCAA tournament game. These teams are amazing. But it
This is
really
an
was a
Elite Eight
high,
game.
high level game.
All right. Dave, you wanted SMU earlier. You got them now. Mustangs. But you were on mute. Unmute yourself.
All right,
There
here
you
we go. Well, I guess more than anything, SMU about 2 weeks ago looked like they could have locked up a bid, and then they went to the Bay Area and lost 2 games. And then, as Rocco alluded to earlier, came back and then could not get a win against Miami. And, suddenly a profile that we thought was looking pretty good is looking a little less. And, their other metrics have slid to the point where, it's not like, oh my gosh, but if you take out the KPI, their SOAR and their WOB is about a 46.5 now. And their predictive side is right about a 43. So they're getting close in both of those to be somewhere near the cut line. They now also have a losing record in the ACC, which, obviously Duke is really good. North Carolina's been pretty good this year. Louisville's been really good at home. But the league and Clemson's been sort of okay. So that's a little bit of a concern. I mean, I think the positives are, that they do have the win over Louisville, they do have the win over North Carolina, and they do have a non-conference win over Texas A&M, which could be worth something. But I think SMU has just kind of struggled down the stretch and put themselves in a spot where they've brought a lot of more questions than answers right now as they head into the final week.
Let's stick in the Longhorn State for two more teams. Matt, you are up with the Texas Longhorns.
It feels like Texas has been on the last four buys, last four in train for several weeks now, and it's due to a resume that's very, very iffy. The resume metrics average is 45, predictive 35.3. They have one quad 1A win that's at Alabama back in January. They do have 7 quad 1 wins, including they beat Vanderbilt. They won at Texas A&M. Their best non-conference win was NC State, but outside of that, though, the non-conference strength of schedule was 222, so not great there. They do have one quad 3 loss that was home to Mississippi State. So if you take away the win against Alabama, there's just not a whole lot of elite action on this resume. Again, which is why they've been probably in the last 4 or 5 or 6 in or out over the last few weeks. But I do think the Alabama win carries more weight than, say, UCLA that I talked about earlier, because that is a road win. Like we talked about, that's something the committee might look and value a bit more. Not a awful resume, and they're probably it's good enough to get in, but just nothing that sticks out to me about Texas.
Not in any stylistic way, but resume wise, they feel like a Louisville team that did win one game, but also pooped the bed 3 times. So it's tough to know what to do with Texas. I have the Aggies of Texas A&M. The good here, they are top 43 in all the metrics except for KPI. I feel like we've had a lot of except for KPI conversations this season. I don't know what's going on with that metric. They have 3 quad 1A wins and no losses beyond quad 2. I think that's pretty impressive when you're talking about teams in this range, although we do end up having several teams here that haven't lost any games of that ilk. They also, in addition to their 3 quad 1A wins, they beat Kentucky at home and they swept Oklahoma, which several of these SEC bubble teams could not do. The bad here, their best non-conference win was either at Pitt or a neutral against Florida State. They lost to Oklahoma State, UCF, and SMU, all of those by double digits, although I believe the SMU game was in overtime and it just got a little carried away. And all 3 of those quad 1 wins are kind of suspect as quad 1A wins against Georgia, Texas, and Auburn. The injury here, though, or the roster situation in general, I think is interesting. They didn't have Mackenzie Mbako for the first couple of weeks, and then they lost him after 7 games. He was supposed to be their biggest addition. So they didn't have him at all for the losses to Oklahoma State and UCF. And just the sheer situation with this roster going from buzzball to buckyball. The only player that returned from this roster was Chris McDermott, who played 45 minutes last year and has played 36 minutes this year. Not a relevant returnee, and not even like, right. You look at Indiana and Iowa, right? They had to reset their whole rosters, but DeVries brought his son. McCollum brought Bennett Sturts. Bucky didn't even bring anybody from Samford. This was an entirely new roster, and he's still somewhat scheduled well for what they were going through. And then they picked up the pace in the beginning of SEC play. Unfortunately, they've fallen on hard times as of late. Anthony on VCU.
All right. The Rams are a pretty good example of a team that looks the part, but their resume just quite doesn't represent maybe how good they actually are. I mean, this is a team that's generally played pretty well against the top competition. But unfortunately, depending on who you have in your field, they're either 0-5 or 1-6 against the projected field. So it's close calls, and clearly a team that can be very competitive with tournament competition, but just can't quite get over the hump. And it gets to 1-6 versus the projected field, depending on how you feel about New Mexico and Virginia Tech. Obviously, New Mexico, a loss for them, and Virginia Tech, a win. They did handle USF in the Bahamas pretty handily. That was back in November. That game has looked a lot better of late as USF has surged in the American. But the question here is missing close enough and the metric profile enough? Metrically, they're there. I mean, the resume average is a shade below 40 or a shade above 42, I get, or below 42. Predictive average has them closer to 50. Their KPI is really helping it at 36. Played a decent non-conference schedule in the top one, just inside the top 100. But really, again, struggling to put a mark up against and get over the hump against the best competition. They're still 3 games below 500 in quads 1 and 2. They've done generally everything that's been asked of them in the A10, except get past St. Louis. And, and they also had a close loss at George Mason back when George Mason looked like good George Mason, not so good George Mason that we're seeing now. And they led, one of those St. Louis games, they led at home with 2:30 to go. They were up, and they led it actually kind of a late SLU run there. I think that game ended up SLU won by 7 or 9, but it was close. So this is a team that has showed us all throughout they're capable of playing these high level games, just hasn't really pushed themselves over the finish line against those teams. But the metric profile fits where we're looking at here. So it's a really tricky team to dissect.
All right. And Graham bringing up the rear with the Hokies of Virginia Tech. And remember, if anybody wants to include any of the teams that we have there highlighted in yellow, let me know. We'll tack them on in here as well.
Virginia Tech has a couple big wins versus Virginia, one of Virginia's only 4 losses of the year. That game went to triple overtime. They won at Clemson. We talked about that earlier. Clemson actually was coming off that West Coast trip. That was their first game back when the Hokies went to Clemson and picked that one up. At Syracuse is close to a quad 1A or quad 1 win, but it is quad 2. Cal is, one of those teams we're considering for the field. So a nice home win there. Colorado State on a neutral court is looking better now that they're playing much better in the Mountain West. Providence on neutral at South Carolina also adds some resume depth. Where I think it gets really interesting, though, for the Hokies is they have 3 losses, all by 1 point. They lost to Miami on the road by 1. They lost to SMU on the road by 1. They lost to Stanford at home by 1. And in addition to the Miami, SMU, and Stanford games, all of those teams scored a shot in the final seconds to beat Virginia Tech. Wake Forest also scored a shot in the final seconds, a 3-pointer, to beat Virginia Tech. So they are really, really close to having 1 or 2 wins that would have completely changed the profile. They are 50th in strength of record. They're only plus 0.37 above 0 in WOB. 8 and 11 against quads 1 and 2. They don't have any quad 3 or 4 losses. 58th in KenPom. Where I think that gets really interesting, though, is they did not have Toby Lawal for the St. Mary's game where they got blown out, the VCU game where they weren't really competitive, or for that 3-point loss to Wake Forest. They also didn't have Toby Lawal or Neo Avdalis against Elon, and here's where it gets even trickier. They also didn't have Antonio Dorn, and Tyler Johnson got injured in that game and had to leave. That had caused Amani Hansberry, who's one of their best players, to foul out. And so they really had pretty much nobody to play with in that game. And they're playing guys that never play any minutes. They ended up barely beating Elon, by far their worst efficiency game of the year. A lot of this bad efficiency for the year goes back to that really poor performance against Elon, where if you consider the injuries that they had, it makes a lot of sense why they struggled with the Phoenix in that one.
You came to bat for Virginia Tech. Not surprising. Do you want to change your camera angle and show off any of that VT merch or anything?
No, I'm on a neutral court this morning.
Neutral court. All right. Did anybody want to add in anybody from those yellow teams? Possibly Indiana, maybe, but I don't know if they're necessarily worth considering in this vote necessarily. I will take that silence as a no. All right, so we can discuss any of these 9 teams. I'm going to check the chat. Matt had that question about where would Miami, Ohio be if they win tomorrow night but lost. I mean, he said in the quarterfinals, but I think we can change that to loses to anyone aside from Akron, because I think that does change certainly the metric profile if it's an Akron loss versus if it's a Western Michigan loss. But let's say they are 31-1 with an immediate loss in that tournament, like St. Joseph's immediately lost in the A10 22 years ago. Granted, that was a much different team, but what do you think the Red Hawks where would they end up?
Well, Kerry, when I was on your podcast with Graham a couple weeks ago, I'm different than most people in Miami of Ohio. I just have a hard time. I know what history says. I know all that stuff. Playing one game in quadrant 1 or 2 with a non-conference strength of schedule 255, I just have a hard time justifying that at-large spot. I'm going to get a pushback from you four, and I'm prepared for that. But I have a hard time doing that when 26 of your 27 games you play against quad 3 and quad 4, and there's just no meat to the wins on your schedule. I struggle with that so much.
I mean, it's a struggle for all of us. We've never dealt with this profile before. You would never see a team with one quad 2 win and no quad 1 even in the conversation. But yeah, we've never seen this before. And I was on a non-unnamed bracketology podcast yesterday, and they were asking me about Miami, Ohio, and Auburn. I was like, if Auburn loses to Alabama and then gets in with 16 losses, it would be the first time ever that an at-large team had 16 or more losses. And if they get in place of a Miami, Ohio team that, I mean, I know you want to say they're 27-0 as opposed to 30-0, whatever their win total is, like it's going to be, if not the highest, certainly one of the highest that has ever been left out. Like, I think I'm going to quit bracketology right then if Auburn gets in over Miami, Ohio.
Yeah. To that point, what this reminds me of, I want to say it was 2003. It goes back, whatever it was. It was a long time ago, as far as in bracketology world. But a lot of people were really surprised when Utah State got left out of the field in favor of UTEP. And I thought UTEP was going to get in over Utah State. Everybody's like, how can you leave out Utah State? They only have 3 losses. I'm like, well, and look who they played. Like, even compared to UTEP's schedule was a lot more difficult. And it's not like UTEP played the hardest schedule in the world, obviously, but that difference between one game against the first 2 quads and 7 or 8, that's a huge difference in strength of schedule. And to Matt's point, it is a unique profile. I've come to terms with Miami. If they win this final game, I'm putting them in the field no matter what. They can do whatever in the MAC tournament. I'm putting them in the field. But I'm not sure the committee will come to the same.
Yeah, I'm okay being wrong on that side. I've been saying that for a while. But yeah, to your point on, the Utah State UTEP, like a 3-loss team getting left. We've seen that before. Like there have been years where like Murray State or Stephen F. Austin, Coastal Carolina had like 2 or 3 losses. And we're like, yeah, you have no chance. But just to have no losses at all, it just changes it. Now, granted, they would have 1 in this scenario that we're talking about, but this is uncharted waters for all of us, and we've got probably 60 combined years worth of bracketology experience in this little call here.
Well, the only thing I would add to it is I agree with the sentiment. I mean, I think just optically, if Miami wins this final game and completes an unbeaten regular season, I think optically it just looks really bad for the committee to then not take them as an at-large. The only caveat that could come about that we mentioned just a little bit earlier is that is assuming that we have a traditional full at-large field available to us. If we start to lose, because if Miami loses, you're going to drop 1 at-large spot already. So if then St. Louis loses, somebody comes out and wins, besides Utah State wins the Mountain West, some other things happen, then all of a sudden maybe you lose 4 or 5 at-large spots. Does Miami still fit in at that point might become still a tougher question. So optically, I'm with you guys. I think it would look really bad to set that precedent. But they could have an out simply by saying all the things that have already been said. I think I would feel really bad if that happened, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
That's my worry too. I mean, if you get a 3-bid WCC, you get a 2 or 3-bid Mountain West somehow, and you start picking this apart, and you say, well, to Dave's point, it is so easy to hyper focus on those couple of things that really stand out for Miami. I would my own personal committee, I would put them in. But I'm saying the committee has a very easy way out of this if they want to take it, if they're bold enough to take it, if it comes to that path. And yeah, I think there'll be some serious uproar, but the reality is like they can harp on the schedule, they can harp on the, one game outside of quadrants 3 and 4. It'd be very easy to do. Um, like you said, if Miami can undefeated regular season, I think optically puts them in a very challenging position to be able to um, make that call. But you know, do we really believe that the committee is going to put Miami in and leave out Indiana, Auburn, XYZ, and have 4 power conference teams on the first 4 out?
I
Probably
mean,
not.
I will, to play devil's advocate here on Miami. We've heard a lot of talk about Matt Brown seeing this FOIA request, and Miami have reached out to everybody. They couldn't get anybody to play them. I think they're lucky this year that they couldn't get anybody to play them. They are predicted average 87 for a reason. They're probably not in tournament contention if they had gotten other teams to play them. There is a part of me that thinks this actually went as well as it possibly could have for Miami, because they probably wouldn't be anywhere close to the field if they were playing in a power conference.
Yeah. The only last thing I'll say that does work in their favor is, if the committee does get in a hard spot and they want to pull out the wins above bubble, which was a big point of emphasis last year, that still, the resume metric would still favor including Miami of Ohio. So there's just not a clear way to answer that question. I think if they win tomorrow night, it's going to be very difficult to leave them out for a whole lot of reasons. So I guess, we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But I think they're in pretty good shape if they win tomorrow and complete an unbeaten regular season.
Yeah,
I'll add on the devil's advocate route that Graham was going. I think it really damages their argument of, look how it's just hard to go undefeated, right? Except Akron is also beating the shit out of the entire MAC outside of that one 3-point loss at Miami, Ohio. Like, I think Akron only has one game that was decided by fewer than 10 points outside of that loss to Miami, Ohio. So you combine that with the fact that they played the weakest non-conference schedule in the country. It's just like, I think Graham's onto it. Like, they're lucky that they didn't play anybody, and that's coming from a Miami, Ohio proponent who, I'm with you, Graham. I'm putting them in no matter what if they win that game tomorrow night.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I saw Miami, Ohio live back in November. They played a special game in Jacksonville against UNC Greensboro. That was actually a game scheduled because Greensboro was good last year. So they intended to schedule some of these games with higher hopes. UNC Asheville, also another team they played on the road. That's typically a top 150 type of team. They end up in the 250s this year, I think. But the Greensboro game was interesting because Miami was totally physically dominated for a full half. You can go back and look at the box score if you want to. They were down 8 at half. And for parts of the first half, they were down by as many as 17. And I was like, going into that game, I didn't know where Miami, Ohio was headed at that point in the season. You're just kind of feeling teams out. I was like, man, they're not nearly as good as I thought they were. I was at halftime, I was just kind of writing them off in my head. And then I got to see just truly how connected and competitive they are. The second half, they just flipped a switch, completely just hustled and dove for loose balls, flipped the script of a game that was played at a Division II HBCU school, Edward Waters University, and completely took it to Greensboro. And by the last 5 minutes, suddenly you look up and they're up by 14. You're like, how the hell did that just happen? And I think that game, and there was maybe one or two others like that in the non-conference, made them who they are. And you've seen that same movie play out in several MAC games since, and that's what makes them unique and special. And I agree, like it is hard for them to go to undefeated. Akron's just a different style of team. Like you said, they've had 2 games in the MAC besides their loss to Miami, Ohio, that were even single digits. But Akron's built to destroy. They're built to run and gun and just blow teams out. If you can deny their transition, you have a chance to beat Akron. It's much different than Miami, Ohio style, which doesn't yield to very good defense for most of the year. They finally figured out defense these last 3 weeks. And they're getting some separation, but then that Skulljack injury made the Western Michigan game really interesting. So I'm curious. I'm really interested just about their entire team, but I think the most important part of their story is the only reason a lot of these guys wanted to come back and play together is they lost to Akron by 2 in the championship game last year. So no matter what you and I and the 6 of us are talking about, for them internally, the most important part of their season is the MAC tournament. And I just think they're going to be totally dialed in to make sure they cut down the nets in Cleveland and make our lives a little easier.
Approve of that entirely. We had a note in the chat from Cardinal Dave Bracketology. Dave, is this from you? As far as team sheets are concerned, I think Texas should be listed as 17 and 12 because they beat Chaminade. I think that's correct. I pulled these records from Ken Palm. I didn't, in fact, obviously I had Miami, Ohio at 30 and 0, so I wasn't going the team sheet route. It's a minimal difference, but would 17 and 14 against D1 as opposed to 18 and 14 if you include Chaminade make any tangible difference? I mean, I think it is what it is. 17 and 14 is acceptable in history. I don't think it changes things in a way that like Auburn needs to get to a certain, +3 threshold. Anybody else in these 9 teams that you want to touch on? Go back to? I knew we would fixate on Miami, Ohio for a while.
It's too easy.
Let's go back to VCU because we will, I think by the end of tomorrow night, by the time we're actually getting into seeding because by the end of tonight, we'll end up with 50 teams and, not including the 22, presumably one bid leagues, there are 46. So we're going to have our extra 4. So if a team gets selected tonight, that just means it's part of, could be still in the first 4 out. And by the time we're done, right around that time, we're going to be watching whether or not VCU wins at Dayton or not. Just, gun to your head, if they win that game, what's the percentage chance that they get in when all is said and done? Let's start with Dave. Why don't you throw a number out there?
Well, if they're 50-50, I would probably leave it about right there. I mean, I think to me, they have to win that Dayton game to give themselves a chance in the A10 tournament to have another run at St. Louis. I don't think it's not like Dayton is a bad loss, but it's just another missed chance to add another something on the resume, which probably be a quad 2, might be a low end quad 1. I don't remember right where Dayton is off the top of my head, but yeah, it's just one more loss and creates that larger gap between what we talked about, missed chances. I don't know that VCU can have many more missed chances and still end up realistically on the other side of the cut line without help. So I would kind of leave it. To me, it's kind of a game they have to win. So if they lose tomorrow night, I think it drops their chances maybe to like 30%.
I think
Yeah, I'm a dead. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Graham.
I was just going to say, I think VCU has a scheduling advantage, in my opinion. What I mean by that is, I think to Rocco's point, when we talk about Gonzaga, hay in the barn, I think if they get this win against Dayton, it's going to look pretty good as they head into the A10 tournament. And with that final being on Sunday, committee's going to have to decide at some point, what do they want to do with VCU? And there's a good chance when they look at VCU will not have added that final loss. So they'll be looking at them with better metrics than they're going to be looking after they add whatever that loss is. I think that could really help VCU, especially with the emphasis on WAB. We hear so much about it. When the committee looks at VCU, they'll probably be over a 1.0 at that time, would be my guess. And that's probably going to be enough, in my opinion, if they're there.
I'm actually worried the timing of the A10 tournament, though, works against them because I just feel like with what VCU has ahead of them and who the teams that are around them that they're trying to leapfrog and the ones that are behind them, VCU almost has to come up with 2 wins for every 1 win that everybody else has to pick up. Just with most of those games for other people on the neutral court, it's going to be quad 1 or quad 2. Some of them are going to be playing other projected tournament teams earlier than Thursday or Friday. VCU, I mean, realistically, they're going to get, I'm trying to think of the A10 bracket off the top of my head, but they may only have 1 game in the A10 tournament before they bracket or before they actually seed in bracket,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Which
before
which
Friday. Yeah.
concerns me a little bit because their play, VCU's play is a metric play and it's a wins play, right? It's not going to be the quality wins play, but maybe Virginia Tech with the split there right on the edge of the cut line might help. But I actually think it works against them to have, potentially their most meaningful game Saturday not really looked at and factored in outside of that Dayton game coming up. I just think there's too many. I have them at the back end of my field right now, last team in, but I think there's too many ways they can get passed by other teams. I would put them even if they win at Dayton. I don't. My percentage for them is like 35%, even if they win. I'm just lower. I had them in, but I'm lower on their outlook just because I think they have so much more to do to keep pace, and I think their timing actually hurts them a little bit more than others.
Let's pivot from the VCU topic. Andrew Schaefer says, I know you guys discussed UCLA earlier about how they don't have a legit road win. Can the same be said for Ohio State? Graham, you brought that up that, all they did was they won at Northwestern. They don't really have much else. Could head to head be a factor between those two? I mean, we're not discussing them head to head right now, but I think I have them at like 40 and 41 on my seed list. I know you guys are all a bit higher on UCLA after they beat Nebraska. Like I said, I didn't vault them up for that home win, but I think this is more of an Ohio State question at this point. How much are we worried about their road and their road neutral record?
I'll be worried about it if they lose to Indiana. I won't be worried about it if they win.
True. Fair enough. Matt in Texas asks, where do you guys have UCF and TCU? I believe UCF got in on our last vote, so they are in our theoretical top 34. TCU is in holding, so they're going to be in the vote after this upcoming vote. Question, missed the Virginia Tech portion. If Virginia Tech sneaks past Virginia on the road on Saturday, what do we think? I think that's their only chance to get in. I think they absolutely have to win that game. Anybody disagree?
I think there's still a small chance because one thing the ACC did this year, which I think is very helpful to its bubble teams, I do not think it's accidental at all. They got rid of the bottom three teams from the tournament. So what they're doing is allowing these teams like the Virginia Techs, the Stanfords, the Cals to maybe pick up a decent win in their first game and then follow it up with the big win in the next round. So I think when the committee meets, even if they were to lose that one, you might see like they still might actually get a somewhat decent wob if they were to win their next two games in the ACC tournament. You make the semis, I actually think they're looking pretty good from a wob and strength of record standpoint too. And again, their quad 1-2 record isn't even that bad. Even if they were to lose that, 8-12 would be where they'd be looking at. If they were to go 2-1 in the ACC tournament and they end up at 10-13, that's still a selectable record against Q1 and 2. I think, Carrie, weren't you talking about Q1 and 2 teams with having 10 wins? And I can't think of a team that has had 10 wins against Q1 and 2 and been left out.
I said that a while ago with I think it was in regard to Clemson and NC State at the time. It's funny. I think
West
when I
Virginia
looked
won
that
the
up,
team, and that was because of the
yeah,
energy rate of DeVries.
yeah, I think when I looked that up, ironically, NC State was like 12-7 against quads 1 and 2, and now they're 11-7, and it's like a month later. But yeah, let's go ahead and vote on these 9, and we'll decide which of the 4 join our previous holdover. Boy, I should have told you guys to vote and then asked some of these questions from the chat. That was stupid of me. If anybody's got any questions out there in viewership world, throw them our way, and we'll touch on them so we don't have too much dead air going. But everybody's going to be ranking these 9, and whoever's the top 4 will join Missouri, NC State, TCU, and Utah State for the next vote of 4 teams to get in. And then we'll pivot to some others. So yeah, normally the committee would not vote on 9, but it felt wrong to not include Auburn in this conversation. Andrew Schaefer says if VCU wins at Dayton and makes the A10 tournament final, I would think they're in. Any other loss likely pushes them out of the field, unfortunately. That's probably the right take. Because I would have them, I already have them in. I would feel a little more comfortable with them being in with a win at Dayton, which is borderline quad one, quad two. But yeah, I think if they take an early loss, that'll be easy for the committee to ding them. Cardinal Dave bracketology again, is Penn State getting blasted tonight problematic for Iowa? Who's Penn State even playing? I know Rutgers was beating Michigan State a minute ago. Having potentially 2 quad 3 losses to 3 quad 1 wins seems like a questionable ratio. And then he says a win tonight would make this irrelevant over Michigan. That is true. But yeah, the having those losses to Penn State and Maryland is absolutely what is keeping Iowa from. I mean, they didn't. We had to discuss them earlier. They're not in our consensus top 30. Um, I don't know. Do we want to? Anybody want to go back to Iowa while I fill in my ballot? Because you guys have all been very diligent here.
Well, the one thing Iowa has going for them that we had just talked about was this idea of the DeVries West Virginia team being the only team with the 10 quad 1 and quad 2 wins to miss out. And they happen to have a big issue of not having DeVries. So I can kind of get it, even if I disagree with it. And then I look at this Iowa team, they're already 10-8 against quads 1 and 2. So even if they drop these final 2, they're still 10-10 against Q1 and Q2. Even if they have, that quad 3 loss, even if one of them turns that second one, the Penn State one turns into another Q3 loss, well, now they just gained a little bit of win percentage against the first 2 quads. So I think Iowa's in good shape as long as they don't lose that first Big Ten tournament game. If they lose these final 2 and the Big Ten tournament game, then they could potentially be in some trouble just because we don't know where the bubble is going to finally stop. And that's, I know fans hate to hear that too, because they always want to have something definitive, but we don't know what other teams are going to do. We don't know how many bid thieves there's going to be. These really are factors that change whether your team is in good shape or not.
Anybody wants to discuss anything while I'm working on these votes? Have fun.
Well, I think for me, I'll just disclose where I had Auburn. I had Auburn last. I know the win at Florida is impressive. I know scheduling tough is impressive. I look at that record against Q1 and Q2 of 8-13, and I think, okay, I know how tough that schedule is. I can get behind that. And then I remember they only have 2 wins against Q3, and they lost at home to Ole Miss. I can get behind what they've done against quads 1 and quads 2 if they did more against Q3. But a lot of their wins are just really throwaway wins in Q4 that have little to no value to me. So if they hadn't lost that Ole Miss game, I think I'd have them in the field right now. But that, to me, is the excuse that the committee needs to keep them out. And honestly, a valid one, because I don't think they have enough quality wins when you consider they really haven't done much in Q3 either.
All right. The votes are in, and it will be Miami, Ohio, Ohio State, Texas, and Texas A&M joining the holdovers of Missouri, NC State, TCU, and Utah State. I will work on getting those going in the spreadsheet here. Any thoughts on those 8 teams? Whoa.
Yeah, I think NC State's a team that's clearly playing horrible right now. It's a little bit of a different animal than what we thought it was, and we'll see if they can right the ship here in the next couple opportunities. But the one thing saving NC State for selection at least is they won at Clemson and SMU, 2 just really tough road wins, at least on paper. SMU now being a bubble team, that's losing its luster significantly, but. They did win at Wake on top of that. They won at Florida State. They won at Pitt, and they have an 8-6 record away from Raleigh. I mean, so just all that work they did away from home paid off. The good schedule paid off. Buying teams like Greensboro, even though Greensboro didn't end up to be good, buying VCU, buying UAB, buying Liberty, like they were bold. They probably would have bought Miami, Ohio if they had a good date to do it. So, I mean, I give NC State a ton of credit for that because if they played a schedule similar to some of their ACC peers or Power Five peers, they wouldn't have that backbone to get to 11 quad two wins, but they have it right now, thanks to the non-conference. But the way they're playing right now, they're still in jeopardy from a seeding standpoint, I think, to land in Dayton as low as that, despite having, most of their power numbers established back in the early part of the year. They've just been completely ripped to shreds in their last six performances.
Yeah, I mean, to echo a little bit what Rocco said, what concerns me is that for a while, I think NC State's numbers and their metrics were maybe a little better than what the team actually was. Um, and now that they've gone on this losing streak, I mean, it's a good thing they had that dominant win over North Carolina in the middle of that stretch,
Yeah.
or it would really be looking bad right now. But their wob and stuff has slipped almost into the mid 40s. So,
hmm
if that drops another 5 points between here and whatever, it starts getting in very, very iffy territory. Again, it's probably going to work out, but what I always like to say is what once seemed almost certain is now much less certain than it was.
Yeah, right. And the home Georgia Tech loss,
It's just
that started off as just a normal bad loss, and it's turned into like a horrific loss.
Yeah, I think
well,
if
I
they
mean
lose to Stanford, they're in a lot of trouble.
I mean the reality is
It'd be
this is
interesting.
the other part of the equation. NC State, if depending on how a couple of things play out, yeah, I mean they've lost it could be three teams and could be four teams that don't make the field. So it's like one of those things when you get it doesn't really matter so much unless you end up right along the cut line. But
Yep.
I just think
I've
for
got
me, having the two wins against Clemson and SMU, that's a differentiator. Most teams in this conversation are not going to have multiple wins against teams, at least in serious consideration for the tournament. And so I tend to put a lot of emphasis on road wins. I think that stands out for NC State in a positive way.
We'll also look at the
Yeah, that's
non-conference strength of schedule, like compared to UCLA or Iowa. I mean, their non-conference SOS is 38, so they tried. I mean, they went to Maui, they played Kansas. I think that also, if we're coming down to looking at a few teams, that has to play a factor as well, as along with the wins at Clemson and at SMU.
right. I agree with that. I think the one thing that they've had in the bank for a little while now is the two Clemson SMU road wins on top of all the things just mentioned. I agree with all that. It's just at this very point, there's a world where Clemson might only be a 9 seed and SMU might be an NIT team. And at that point, it's like, whoa, how much does that impress you anymore? It is tough to win on the road. I give them just almost as much credit for going to Wake Forest and Florida State and winning. Like those are not easy places to win either. But it's not like they won at a top four protected seed or even a team guaranteed to wear white on the opening day of the NCAA tournament.
to that point on looking at what the best wins actually were. And I was going to ask this earlier because there is at least one team that I forget who it was. Their two best wins are at home against
Probably
Louisville and
Ohio
at home
State.
against North Carolina. No, it's an ACC team. It might be
Oh,
California or
it's
something.
SMU. It's SMU. Yeah, I'm looking at
Okay.
it. Yeah.
But so when you consider like best wins, right? Is it based on if it's based on net, that win over Louisville is better than the win over North Carolina, and based
I,
on net, winning at SMU is more impressive than a home win over North Carolina. But like I don't view it that way at all. I mean,
no,
not that
no,
the committee is looking at the three best wins, although Graham, you said that they were talking about three
they
best wins
were.
quite a bit
They
during the reveal.
they were. Yeah, and I'll
Yeah.
say this. I mean, I think the easy way to think about it is you base it on the board. Like right now, Clemson's like 35 on the board or somewhere in that range. SMU's in the mid 40s now on the board. Base
Okay.
it on the seed list. Don't worry about net or metrics. Just go on your own organic rankings, that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, I agree.
I was going to say one
Graham, I
team
think.
on here real quick,
Nope.
Carrie, that, and I missed this when we talked about them earlier, so I apologize if this is rehashing. One team going through the seed list that keeps catching my eye as a team that I want to push further down, but I have trouble based on their wins is Mizzou. I think they have a sneaky good profile for this part of the field. And I know they're under 500 in quad one and quad two, but the wins speak for themselves. And a lot of them were very tight games, but it doesn't really matter. They won by 1 point or 2 points or 40. Well, it would for their predictives, obviously, but the predictive average is tough. But they have a pretty solid resume for this area. And the predictives are really the thing that's given me trouble with them. And obviously where they are in the net too, I think is just problematic from an optics standpoint for when they get looked at. But I think I've seen a lot of other projections too with them pretty low, and I just have trouble with that too. Like
Yeah.
I really think this is a pretty good resume overall. So let's not forget that Missouri was, I don't know, pretty much, I don't know, 6 weeks ago looked like they were dead in the water. And they did do a really terrible non-conference slate again, which is like I think Dennis Gates' forte at this point.
Played
But
at Howard though.
they did play. That's true. They did play at Howard. That's actually, I give them a lot of credit for going there. Anyways, just want to mention Missouri because I do think this is one that pops up at this range. That is,
Yeah.
if they can pick up, a good win or two in the SEC tournament early, could really shoot them up quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
agree.
mentioned Missouri
They've
several
gotten,
times.
yeah.
I was just saying, in our, we do our SEC pods on Friday, and I've mentioned Missouri several times that I don't think the last time we looked at them, none of their resume metric, none of their six metrics were 41 or higher. And I wanted to have them at 31 on my overall seed list. Like the actual resume, when you look at the results, is far more impressive than the metrics on it.
Yes.
So
Yep.
this is one case where I'm ready to deviate from the numbers.
Well, I think a big part of the problem is they've been completely depanced multiple times. You look at the Illinois game, they lose by 43, they lose by 20 to Kansas, they lose by 16 a couple nights ago at Oklahoma. When they get down in games, they give up. And that's the thing that bugs me the most about these power conference teams. Nothing against Mizzou. I went and covered their Mississippi State win. Everybody's awesome there. Good kids too, good coaching staff, like nothing personal, but it bothers me that these teams that give up in the middle of games or just get pounded on a regular basis, they still have the opportunities to pick up good wins. So of course they're going to eventually find resume building wins, and that's where Missouri's going to find their way in the field. I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm just saying there are games where they have completely just turned off the lights, with about 20 minutes to go.
Yeah.
Texas
That's
at
been
Texas at home
that's
by
been
17.
NC State recently. They've gotten pummeled over and over and over
Right.
again. So
Yeah, and it's just
uh,
hard. Like last year we had to put Georgia in the field, right? And then they're down like 27-2 to Gonzaga in the first game. And I'm like, why did I just spend the last 6 weeks talking about Georgia? This was such a waste of a bid. What a waste of a bid.
That was a matchup nightmare for the Bulldogs.
It
That was
really
like the
was.
worst possible matchup they could have drawn. Honestly, anyone in the field, that was the worst one they could have drawn in
Well, I
that
And
will
spot.
say,
Gonzaga almost beat Houston. I mean, that was a tough draw for sure, but Gonzaga shouldn't have been an 8. And I'm just saying this happens every year. Like there'll be 2 or 3 examples this year, and it bothers me. Missouri's a great candidate for it this year.
it might be Georgia again. Let
It
me
might be
jump in, and then
Georgia
I'm going to
again.
throw it. I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to throw it to Graham. The sheet is ready. Whenever you want to vote on these, rank these 8 teams that are there now, and then whoever's top 4 of this will then join the field. Graham, whatever you wanted to throw in there, go for it.
the thing I want to mention about Missouri specifically is that they did not have Jaden Stone for that worst loss at Notre Dame. He did not play in that game. In those 2 games, they got blown out against Kansas and Illinois, and really blown out against Illinois. Like more so, definitely way worse than the Kansas game. He didn't play there either. So I think Missouri, they didn't get much in the non-conference, but once Stone came back, they really have improved. And I think you just look at the wins, it's proofs in the pudding. They're a better team than they were in the non-conference portion of the season now that they've got a full roster.
Proofs in the pudding, Hayes in the barn. What else we got? Matt Doyle says Missouri should not be in the first four consideration. I don't think they are. I think they're going to get in, clear that. But he does add they have that piece of gold in winning versus Florida, so that's a Rocco fan right there.
It was at home though. It's a little bit of
Yeah,
silverish gold.
silverish gold. So what? No, that would
Guys, do
be
you know who
bronze
does have a
gold.
piece of gold, though? Do you know who does have a piece of gold?
It's Auburn, yeah,
The
for
Auburn
sure.
Tigers, gentlemen. The Auburn Tigers have a piece of gold.
Yeah,
They're not in this mix, but TCU got Florida on a neutral. That's a silver
that's
gold.
pretty
Home
good.
gold is bronze gold. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's just gold for TCU. If you beat
That's
them on
just
the road,
gold.
if you beat them on the road, it's platinum gold.
There it is.
There you go.
Matt says it's still gold, Rocco.
It sure is. It sure is. It's just maybe not as valuable.
Carrie,
Better to definitely have it than not to have it. I would say that.
Yeah.
Carrie, you were mentioning before SMU's resume. You were saying, you look down and it's just a home win against North Carolina and whoever, Wake Forest and whoever.
Louisville.
I actually think that's most ACC teams' resumes outside of Duke and North Carolina is
Yep.
just looking down and seeing that they beat a couple of other teams at home and then beat Wake Forest on the road. It's actually really impressive because this happened. This is probably the second year in a row this has happened, and it does feel like the league is a lot stronger top to bottom, but it kind of softened out as the year went on. That maybe some of the teams that we thought were stronger are kind of just middle of the road.
Doesn't kill you, makes you strong. We got a votes in. We got a three-way tie, but that does not matter here because it's 1, 2, and 3 between Missouri, TCU, and Utah State. And then the fourth team is NC State. So the other four will be carrying over to the next vote. That being Miami, Ohio, Ohio State, Texas, and Texas A&M. All right, we're a tiny bit behind schedule, but I think we're still in good shape. We've got these. Oh, I got to update that spreadsheet as well. Let me go to these teams. We already discussed Auburn, VCU. So everybody from here over is still to be discussed. We got a few that were not assigned. I'll just say if anybody wants to talk about them, have at it. But we've got 6 teams left who need to be briefly discussed. Matt on the California Golden Bears.
All
Matt,
right.
you're on mute. There
Yep.
you
No,
go.
I'm good. Yep, I'm good. So their resume is kind of confounding, right? So their resume average 52, predictive 71.3. Quad 1A win, it's at Miami, 4-4 versus quad 1. The non-conference strength of schedule, 310. However, they did beat UCLA on a neutral floor. One quad 3 loss home against Pitt, so there's a whole lot of nothing really with Cal. And I know that they've kind of been on the fringe of the bubble conversation, at least for me recently. Last 5 or 6 in, maybe 4 in, but the predictive shows you what they think about Cal as a basketball team. I guess the Miami win does stick out, but otherwise, I don't see a whole lot here to go on.
Yeah, this is in theory right now we are picking our first 4 out. That could change, but yeah, this is not the gold of the resume metrics. Anthony is muted right now. Probably somebody woke up, so we'll skip those next 2
No, I'm here.
and go.
I'm here. I
Oh,
got
he's
you.
back. He's back. All right.
I got you.
Cool.
Refilling the
Here we go.
water here. Gotta be hydrated.
Cincinnati, go nuts. Oh, I gotta hydrate
I'm gonna
too.
can I start with Indiana? I want to start with Indiana. Sorry.
Fine, you can do that.
All right. So Hoosiers are a really interesting case to me because the predictives are really pretty good at this point. I mean, they indicate that this team should be, if they make it into the field, could very well find themselves a bit higher than we might expect them to be. Predictive average is at 34. I don't know what Bart Torvik sees in this team that I'm not, but he seems to love them. So Torvik's at 28 for Indiana, which is just absolutely mind blowing to me after watching them play basketball for most of the year. Uh, this is a pretty raw and rough resume at this point. I mean, they're 2-10 in quad one, 5-12 overall in the first two quads. They're not going to get the benefit of the doubt that North Carolina did last year or anything like that, or Memphis. I mean, they played a 4 non-conference strength of schedule, 224-ish or 225, somewhere in that range. They haven't won much on the road. They're 3-7 away from Assembly Hall. 30 a third of their wins are versus teams sub 250 in the net. So if we're having that Miami Ohio conversation about teams wanting to schedule net sub 250, Indiana did quite well on that front last year in putting that together. Just the road. I mean, again, we talk about road wins and maybe not being as big of a decider, right? I mentioned that Maryland example before, but I do think it matters a little bit when, 3 of their wins away from home, 2 of them are not even in the top 150 of the net. Maryland and Rutgers, they only have that road win at UCLA, which is actually aged very nicely for them. So it helps, but they've also looked just bad in, I mean, if you look at the top 6 of the standings in the Big Ten, they're 0-6 against that group, losing by an average of 17 points in those games. Now, again, you would think a team that's on the bubble would at least be able to be competitive in some of those, especially the ones at home, or at least swing maybe one win. We're gonna go 1-5, pick off one of those teams at home, especially with how Purdue has kind of come back a little bit to earth and whatnot. But really tough resume right now. 18-12 overall. Resume average is north of 52 at this point. So Indiana's got some work to do, and that game this weekend against Ohio State is potentially a play out for Indiana, and maybe not a play in just yet, and probably not a play out for Ohio State yet, but get a lot closer. And then do you want me to go right into Cincinnati?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so another really interesting resume that I don't think was on anybody's radar, maybe even as recently as 2.5 weeks ago, prior to that win at Fog Allen. But obviously they picked up a huge win in Lawrence, got Iowa State at home as well. This, still another team that the predictives love, another team that Bart Torvik loves, actually, ironically enough, right next to Indiana at 27th overall. So he must know something. Another team that played a pretty poor non-conference. The main question for Cincy is actually interesting. I mean, they have had some very strong, performers on their team who have missed time. Obviously, Jizzle James, we had the whole issue with him in the beginning of the year with being, I don't know what the actual story was there, but being separated from service, at least for the team for a while. Baba Miller missed a couple games. Mustafa Thiem missed a couple games. Interestingly enough, 2 of those guys missed the Eastern Michigan game, which I would argue they probably still should have won that game, regardless of whether they were there or not. But, you can start to pick this apart where there's some key personnel missing at key times, or some times where the resume was really impacted. Still work to do here. They're still 3-10 against quad one. They still have that awful loss to Eastern Michigan. Just there's, TCU game this weekend though on the road. They haven't been particularly good on the road. They're actually 2-10 road neutral, which is pretty horrendous. So that TCU feels like the final nail in the coffin if they can't get that one. But if they do win, it'll be pretty interesting entering the Big 12 tournament.
I'm glad you mentioned Torvik and Cincinnati, because that has been the team that has confounded me for so long. Like when we first did the pods where we were looking at specifically at the WOB and projecting forward and using Torvik's tourney cast, like just before their big win over BYU, Torvik had Cincinnati listed at like a 40% chance making the tournament. I was like, what the hell does Bart know?
Yeah.
Like what?
No, I think Bart's been smoking something, because when I watch Indiana, I do not think they are the 28th most efficient or best team, however you want to view those metrics, team in the
Cincinnati
country.
broke tourney cast somehow. I don't know. I will say before we move on to my 2 teams here on Indiana, just as you mentioned, their terrible non-conference schedule. I don't think they were planning on a neutral against Marquette being, bouncing between quads 2 and 3, and a home game against Kansas State being a solid quad 3. I don't know if that will come up in the committee room at all. There was still a whole bunch of terrible bye games that they played and they can't get out of.
It's hard to make the
IU,
argument though. Like if Marquette, that I thought about that, but if Marquette stays quad two, let's say they stay in the 90s and that just happens to be quad two, can you really make the argument that that game was guaranteed to be quad one? Like how much better? It's a hard game to play. Like if it's quad three, then maybe you're like, well, they shouldn't have been quad three. Like Marquette has been very good, but if it's quad two already, I don't know how much more can you push for the benefit of the doubt on that.
It's
I don't
Indiana.
know.
They can get games against whoever they want to get games
Yeah.
against. The fact
Yeah.
that they only scheduled that says everything I need to know.
Well, Graham, I have some good news for you. Matt Brown is actually doing an expose and he's foiling all of Indiana's requests where they show that they were turned down by everybody else. So we'll find out about that tomorrow. We're taking it straight to the committee, straight to the committee.
You know, the one
Okay.
interesting thing on that when you're talking about like Indiana's metrics is, and this is where it's been a little challenging because for a lot of times this year, I've said every year there's like one or two teams that kind of become a metrical darling for one reason or another, right? And they've been that kind of a metrical darling for a long time where the results just didn't match up to what the metrics were telling us. So it's either they were better and they were just not winning those games. And so I think, you know, when you look at like their, like the strength of record in the WAP are like 46 and 48 today. So kind of right in that fringe territory. It's the KPI that's up at 63. You know, Nets at 37, the others. So it's just, it screams bubble all the way around. And then it comes down to, you know, how are they going to get deciphered? Are the metrics, is the WAB and their numbers going to win out? Or is it what they've actually done on the court that's going to win out? And that's why I think like the game this weekend with Ohio State is, I mean, it's big for both of them. But if, you know, it's the numbers, if Indiana wins that game, their numbers could just end up being good enough that the committee's not going to leave them out from a power conference.
Yeah, I agree with what Anthony concluded on Indiana that game this weekend. It's probably Indiana has to win, but they don't lock. If Ohio State loses, then they're back on the bubble. The easiest, I mean, I forget who it was that asked in our text chain, like, do you guys root for clarity or chaos? If you're rooting for chaos, you're pulling for Indiana this weekend because Ohio State becomes basically a lock and Indiana's basically dead if that game goes that way. But let's get back into these three teams, and I had to pour myself a drink before I get into this Mountain West garbage. But New Mexico, the good is that they are top 57 in every metric. Indiana, Texas, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech are not, if you want to go that far into the numbers. 6-1 against quad 2. They beat VCU and Santa Clara, both of whom are right there in this conversation as well. But they are the quintessential bubble team at what is effectively exactly a 0 WAB. That will probably update overnight to, who knows, 0.21 positive because it seems to shift at random based on what changes around the bubble. But the bad here, no wins over definite tourney teams, even though we have VCU probably in right now. I mean, that's a solid road win. They did beat the holy hell out of Santa Clara at home, but neither of those teams definitely in. 4 losses outside of the field, including a pretty bad rivalry loss to New Mexico State, and they got swept by Boise State, who lost to Hawaii Pacific. Injury news, they lost Chris Howell after 11 games. He was a pretty key, glue guy for them. I think he came over from UC Irvine. He was supposed to be a critical piece, but I don't think it really changed a whole lot for them. He wasn't going to be a big scorer. And then I'll move straight into San Diego State as well. Oh, even worse. We'll start with some good. They have home wins over Utah State and New Mexico. Also beat Nevada on the road. They have a top 20 defense on KenPom, if that comes up in the war room. The bad is they've lost 4 out of 5. They were swept by Grand Canyon. They have that terrible triple overtime home loss to Troy. And when they did play good teams, they got mollywopped by Michigan and Arizona. The WAB is pretty bad at a minus 6.62. The SOR is like 10 ranks, even lower than the Wob. On the injury front, Guath and Harrington missed a couple of weeks recently, although they seemed to be better without them. They're losing now that those guys are back. Rocco, wrap us up on Seton Hall, and then if anybody wants to say anything on these last couple of teams that weren't assigned to anybody, we can hit on them as well.
Yeah, so Seton Hall in trouble, of course, at this stage. They've only played 6 games against tournament level competition. They're 1-5. That one win came on a great, morning my time, a little more afternoon your guys' time against NC State on the islands of Hawaii. A magical performance by Shaw's Pirates, and it was very inspiring. But unfortunately, a great effort against USC fell short, and they end up playing Washington State in the third place game, which ended up not helping them at all. And from then on out, they've been in this Big East nightmare to where they got 2 cracks at Nova, 2 cracks at UConn, 1 crack at St. John's. They're 0-5 in those games, and that's how you get to your 1-5. They get one more crack at St. John's. I would love for that to be a road chance. Unfortunately, it's a home chance. Probably not going to move the needle enough, even if the Pirates can step up and play. One things that they do have is because the Big East is down and most of the road games are in quad two, they have 6 true road wins in the top 2 quads. That's actually one of the best. That is the highest amount of anybody in the on my bubble board. But it's headlined by Providence, who just fired their coach today. So that's really not the headliner you really need. If they had the 6 and it was headlined by even Villanova, it'd be a much different looking story. And I think overall, for Seton Hall's expectations, they were picked last. It's really cool that they're even on the show, so congrats for that. But I just think it's a dollar short and a day late.
Yeah.
The
I would
interesting
agree
thing
with
with
that.
Seton Hall, real quick, I think will be if they can somehow win the next 3, would be very
Yep.
interesting to see them because that would be home St. John's. They're late, depending on how it shakes out. It would be to their benefit if the 4-5 game was Creighton. They're locked in at the 4 at MSG, and then they will get a shot again at either St. John's or UConn on a neutral. Don't have faith that they'll pull it off given the 0-5 that Rocco just alluded to, but that's probably their path to getting in the field.
Yeah.
It
I
needs
don't
to
think
be UConn.
there's
It needs to be UConn. I mean, St.
Prob
John's is not going to prove much, especially if they beat them on this weekend. That's a team I'd rather see a mix of teams they beat instead of just beat the same team twice, personally.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
And UConn's better. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
so if Seton Hall wins that game this weekend, that would, I guess, if UConn
Make them
loses to
interesting.
Marquette,
Would make them
they would
interesting.
theoretically drop. I
Yeah,
was just gonna say, in terms of
it'd stay on the
seeding,
board.
it would lock Connecticut in as the 1, so they would face UConn in the
Yes,
semifinals
that's a
unless
good point.
Oh yeah,
unless
that is a good
UConn
point.
loses to Marquette.
They're
So
fulfilling their own
um,
destiny there.
yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah, I
UConn's not going to lose to Marquette, so we can count on
I
that, I
don't
think.
yeah I don't think there's any way we're getting Seton Hall in even in our like first 4 out as is. I think they need. I'm with Anthony. They need these 2 marquee wins to get into the mix because they have 1 win over the net top 75 on any venue right now.
Yeah,
But so we assigned these, who was going to touch on each team, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, and we probably could have left out Seton Hall and maybe should have included Oklahoma State. I don't know why I didn't
sure.
ask anybody to jump on them, but does anybody want
Yeah,
to make the case for or against the Cowboys? Rocco, go for it.
I mean, I could present them.
Go
I
do
think
it. Do it.
I think they're very interesting because they get to host Houston to end the season. They just swept UCF, who's in our field. They have a BYU home win and a Texas A&M home win. So we have to look at them as a potential team that could beat Houston on Saturday. If they can't beat Houston, they're not going. So we'll be honest about that. Obviously, their net is stuck in the 70s. It's not your typical candidate. But resume wise, they're right above, right in that 50 range, 52, I think, in the WAB this morning. And they're 2-9 in quad one, 4-7 in their 11 tournament level uh, games. I think it's important to point out that the Big 12 does extremely unbalanced scheduling. So they played all the big boys just one time. This will be their only chance to play Houston, for example. Them and UCF benefited from that schedule, as did West Virginia, which is why I think you're still seeing those teams hanging around. They all played each other twice. And at 11 and 12 against the top three quadrants, I don't love that either. But a win against Houston gets that at least to 500. They will go 2 and 7 against the top two quads on the road, but one of those being at UCF just makes it good enough. Anyway, Oklahoma State, that's I think where they're at.
There are a lot of teams in this range that are 11 and 12 against the top two quads, or against the top three quads, excuse me.
Right,
So,
exactly. It's
yeah.
not fun. But all 12 of I should point out that all 12 of the Oklahoma State losses are in the top 2A quads. So they don't
Yeah.
have any losses quad 2B or worse, whereas a lot of teams like Virginia Tech has two of those losses. San Diego State's got one. Stanford's got four. USC's got three. TCU's got three. So again, Oklahoma State not having any real bad at all will potentially help them. But they do have five losses to non-tournament teams because right now I'm factoring the Baylors, the Cincinnatis, the West Virginias of the Big 12 and the Arizona States as non-tournament teams, and that's probably going to remain.
Yeah, my guess is we're not going to get them in now, and we'll need to revisit that if they beat Houston on Saturday. That will be a major scrubbing point on Sunday if they're able to pull off that upset.
If they're able to play, it'll be a rowdy environment. Gallagher Iba is a very special place.
On the same note, Arizona State, if they were to win in Ames, that's why I think they're worth talking about right now. They get
Yes.
Iowa State in Ames. If that happens, all of a sudden you look at Iowa State versus Texas Tech versus Kansas, Texas, Santa Clara versus Cincinnati. It looks pretty good all of a sudden for the Sun Devils. I think they're really a candidate worth looking at if they get this one.
It's a big if, but they have the opportunity, which is all that matters.
Beating up on Kansas the other night was a big if as well. What am I looking for here? I'm trying to sort these alphabetically, but it's not working for me. Matt Doyle says, I'm with you guys on Indiana, have them as my last team in, but who do you justify putting in over them if they are out? And he specifically asked San Diego State, Cincinnati, VCU, Virginia Tech, Cal. I have VCU in.
I was going to say every one of those teams I prefer. Actually. So yeah, like
all of them.
Those teams win more frequently when playing tough competition. That's all it comes down to for me.
Well, I think part of the other answer to that question is because so many of those teams are so close, depending on what you want to pull out and what you want to look at, that a lot of these, there's some huge bubble games between tomorrow night, Saturday in particular, where the order of what they look like could be different come Saturday night or Sunday afternoon. So, because Virginia Tech gets to go to Virginia. If they win that and get a sweep of, the Cavaliers, if Indiana loses to Ohio State, VCU doesn't, if they beat Dayton or if they lose to Dayton. So there's just a lot of little things that can happen over this next 2 or 3 days that'll set the stage of where we're actually at come Sunday night heading into next week.
Stanford I'm glad they're on the page because they get pretty intriguing too if they pick up a victory. Still those 3 losses outside of the top 2 quads, but they'd have a winning record against Q1 and Q2 and some honestly pretty strong top end wins there. I thought
what's interesting about them too, Graham, is you also have Chisholm Akpar's injury too, which we have to. It's kind of funny. I don't know how the committee looks at it because they're 6 and 7 since he went down, which obviously they would, if they're going to sneak near the field, they will have a positive record against 500 by the time we get there. But they also took the 3 worst losses with him playing. So it's kind of this funny, normally we have it the other way around. Like we talked about Tucker DeVries and all these other injuries ad nauseum, but in previous years, but the Akpar injury is not really that clear as to like, what do you balance there? It's a pretty interesting dichotomy. And I'm glad you brought them up too.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue this past week and a half has been the best they've played all year. I think it's a legitimate argument.
I think
All
they've
right, I
just
have.
finally, I think they've just finally adjusted without him. They were pretty bad when he first went down.
Well, I noticed that in writing about like freshman of the year rankings today, in their last 10 wins, Corey is averaging 29.9 points. Like he has been like their DeBonsa when they win. It's
Uh,
ridiculous how good he's
yeah,
been.
he's amazing.
All right, so I've updated the Google sheet. So for these 12 teams, if you want to have them in the conversation right now. So, I assume that does not include Seton Hall, probably not Stanford, maybe not Arizona State. We'll revisit any of these if they pull off upsets this weekend. But put a one next to that team if you want to include them in this next vote with the likes of Santa Clara, VCU, Auburn, and such. Cardinal Dave Bracketology said it should be Virginia Tech in over Indiana. I mean, there's certainly a case for that. And I would say if we have at least 4 out of 6 people interested in any team right now, we'll include them in that next ranking vote.
I do
We
think
should
Cal.
probably at least go ahead.
I think Cal's intriguing. For me, it's the fact that Miami keeps looking better. So that really has added to Cal's resume, despite them not really doing anything other than going on the road and winning at Georgia Tech. But now that Miami's looking like a stronger victory, that's carrying more weight for me personally. You add in that they already beat North Carolina. The UCLA victory was on a neutral court. At Stanford, obviously, is the Bay Area battle, so maybe not quite as important, but still beating SMU. What really stands out for me about Cal is that they have a lot of wins against teams that we're still considering for the field, and that's important to me.
All right. Well, it is pretty clear that there are only 4 teams we're considering here. So we'll do that. We'll make it a vote of 9. It'll be New Mexico, Indiana, Cincinnati, and California joining the fray. None of the others got any votes. Not surprising. I do think let's at least briefly mention South Florida and Belmont since we put them on here. I wanted to include them in some regard. Belmont's resume, if they had won at Illinois State on Sunday, they would have been a legitimate at-large candidate. They probably wouldn't have gotten in, but they would have been in the conversation every bit as much as UC Irvine was last year. And Rocco, I don't want to bring up old wounds. The Anteater should have gotten in, but
Amen.
I mean, you're our resident mid-major guy. Do you want to go to bat for the Bulls or the Bruins here?
Well, I mean, I agree that they didn't do enough to get in at large, unfortunately. But they've been really, really steady, especially lately in league play. Belmont more so. The first, the first 2/3 of league play. Been a little human losing to Illinois State in the finale, senior day for Illinois State. Tough situation for the Bruins, but they've been pretty awesome, winning at Northern Iowa, at Murray State, at Southern Illinois, at UIC, beating UC Irvine in a road game by a lot earlier in non-conference. Those are all quad 2 road wins. In general, being 16-5 against quads 2 and 3 without playing a quad 1 team. It's really, really tough to do, and I think that's why you see their strength of resume and their WOB in the low 50s, kind of competing from a metric standpoint. It's good that there are tools like that to really stick up for teams that have to play schedules such as Belmont. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of the high major muck, like we'll use Missouri. I've seen them up close. That could just physically dominate a team like Belmont. They would have to shoot the lights out and from 3. They'll be a very fun team to watch if they can survive Arch Madness, but I do not think they're deserving of an at-large. As for South Florida, they're kind of the opposite, where they played with their food a little too much at the beginning of American Conference play, and that screwed their chances up for an at-large. But I think all year long, even in the preseason, we knew that this team was full of high major talented players. Isaiah Nelson got big offers in the portal, decided to stay with Hodgson, and go to Arkansas State. Joseph Pinion, same story there. And now they're really taking off. They're on a good win streak. They've already wrapped the conference up. The American, up until the last couple of years was always a multi-bid league. And they have the athletes to really get to a Sweet 16. But unfortunately, some of those stupid losses they took in the American Conference really is going to bite them and the resume. Just they don't have a chance in that league to like even going to Memphis. They're going to Memphis, I think, in their next game, and that still is like the one year where that wouldn't like significantly jump them back up into the mix, and so that's just unfortunate where the American is. I think them and Tulsa had really good years, but neither one of them did quite enough to get on the radar.
Those 3 losses by 5 points to total.
Yeah, well, I remember
Rough, tough.
The UAB home loss. They were up by 11 at the final TV timeout and turned the ball over 6 times in the last 4 minutes. A totally unexcused, self-inflicted loss. That's why I kind of used the play with their food term there. But it was really self-inflicted wounds of most of those games. So they have nobody to blame but the man in the mirror.
In case you're not watching, Michigan just took a 2-point lead with 45 seconds left. Not that we're talking about Michigan or Iowa at the moment. I mean, I think we could just fly through a few rounds of voting to wrap up. We've got 9 teams. You see them here on the spreadsheet. The top 4 from this next vote will join Miami, Ohio, Ohio State, Texas, and Texas A&M. And we'll vote again. And then that will get us to, I think, 42 teams. I'm not sure where we're at. I'll do the numbers in a minute. But if anybody wants to say anything on, Auburn, Cal, Cincinnati, Indiana, New Mexico that hasn't already said, speak now or forever hold your nonsense.
I just think Cincinnati has looked like a tournament team. And if we're doing old school bracketology where we look at who you don't want to play, I don't want to play Cincinnati. And I think they've got a really good excuse for why they lost to Eastern Michigan. I'm not saying you should lose the game, but if you look into that one, I think we all agree they're not losing to Eastern Michigan if they play today. I'll just say that about the Bearcats.
I hear you barking, big dog. This is a rough group of teams.
This is the perfect advertisement for not expanding the field.
Right.
Like I can't think of a better screenshot of do not expand the field.
I did think it was funny.
This group and maybe the next group that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Rothstein did that tweet last night. I was like, wait, but 14 loss Baylor is like tied with Houston on the road right now. Like this is I'm very much don't expand the field, but tonight is a night to do it. Like I thought it was just funny timing. All right, who do I like in here? Who do I like? Anthony, whenever you want to vote, I'm starting to think about my own here. Is there anything in the chat before I vomit my way through this? Not really. All right.
Yeah, for me, I think Auburn and Indiana, 2 teams that I cannot get behind at all right now. But I'm pretty convinced I'll be behind them if they win road games this weekend. And that really hurts my soul because they've gotten so many chances to do it all year. But I don't think I'm going to be able to deny them a spot in the bracket if they both win this weekend.
Yeah, especially Auburn. If they go to Alabama and win, then it kind of takes that historical aspect of the losses out of the table. I'm not really going to consider them unless they do that. If they do that, then okay, we can have a conversation. Indiana's a little bit more is above Auburn for me, but Auburn would jump them in a hurry if they would happen to go to Tuscaloosa and win, which I don't think it's going to happen. But
I think it really depends on what committee we get, though, because I think last year, and I hate to bring this team up again, but I think last year with North Carolina, how many years before that had the committee chair sat there and said win percentage against teams in the field or win percentage against the top teams? Like they've said, take advantage of the opportunities you were getting, especially around teams that were left out. They did not take advantage of the quality opportunities that they had. And, if the case is, we don't really care as much because we can't because everybody on this area hasn't taken advantage of it, then they have to shift to something else. And then Auburn kind of looks okay in a way, as crazy as it sounds. Like the whole argument against Auburn is they didn't take advantage of the opportunities they had, which is very fair. They did not. But I mean, a lot of these other teams really didn't either. And so then what else do you look at? I don't know. It's a tough be interesting to see what the committee wants to lean on.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Anthony, the other aspect of that is, we've always heard that the entire season matters, right? And so games in November and December matter. Well, and I think that's where, if you're looking to say, hey, if you don't do much in your non-conference, then you really have to do something in your league to show us that you've earned it. That's where I think that's what gets tough when you're making the arguments for like teams like Cincinnati and Indiana, who basically accomplished nothing in their non-conference seasons, or very, very little. And then, which is fine, but then you have to have a little more than you have to kind of are supposed to have a really good to exceptional season in your conference. Now, these things change over time. So, as we've seen, I don't think that's, it's why they're still drastically in the conversation right now, because I just don't know that that's holds as much water as it used to. But, that would be interesting to see if that gets discussed. Some of it's by choice, some of it's just by you didn't play well early, but because I agree with Graham. I mean, Cincinnati in the last 3 weeks to 4 weeks is playing like a team a lot of teams would not want to see opposite them right now.
Well, Graham knows firsthand about not wanting to see Cincinnati play his team.
Did they play Virginia Tech?
No, Ohio State was my team that I was covering earlier. So, yeah, wouldn't want to have that state rivalry.
By the way, speaking of Ohio State, and Graham, you mentioned this the other day. Dave, do you remember when you tweeted like a while back, like Baylor's going to be that tough team that's just hangs out on the bubble all year long? I was like, nope, it's Ohio State. Here they are.
Kerry wins that argument. My Baylor is. I thought they were going to be that team, but they're not anywhere near that team. So
they should have been. All right, so now we've got these 8 to vote on. Miami, Ohio, Ohio State, Texas, Texas A&M, Santa Clara, SMU, VCU, and Virginia Tech. The top 4 from this vote will become teams 39 through 42 in the field. Although I think at this point we're more or less, we'll be done in like 10 minutes, I think. We can get through these pretty quick. Matt, I like how you vote in opposite order that everybody else does. You start at 8 and work your way up to 1.
It's only like a math. Math is not my jam. That's why I teach journalism, not math.
I got a math degree and now I'm a writer, so.
It is interesting with this bubble how many games we have, teams playing each other directly. Obviously, the road wins for Texas and Texas A&M against each other, but you take it out, and VCU and Virginia Tech don't play each other all that often. They got that game in, could be pivotal. Santa Clara.
It was in the battle for Atlantis, though. They didn't agree to it.
Yeah, I know, but I just mean the fact that they actually had that game is
it's pretty cool.
Play each other.
Cool.
To actually have it is very important, I think, this year for both of them.
Yes.
One of those where I'm sure Virginia Tech wishes they hadn't run into them. Santa Clara, though, the thing I keep running back into with them is the fact that they got the opportunity against New Mexico and couldn't take advantage of it. And I'm not saying that
it was important. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but it's important to note Jake Ensminger was injured, didn't play. They were completely not themselves that day.
It just lines up for me mentally a lot that New Mexico won very handily. And then New Mexico went to VCU and won. VCU beat Virginia Tech. The question then becomes, is Cal part of that mix? It could get interesting, but New Mexico, all roads lead to New Mexico when you compare these.
All roads lead to New Mexico. Hayes in the barn in New Mexico.
I'm very.
We're still selecting, right, Kerry? Not seeding.
Yeah, we are voting. We're ranking these 8. So this will get 4 teams into the field. Yes, we're not doing anything.
No seeds.
Yeah, we're not doing anything with seeding. No.
Okay, perfect.
I thought I had hit.
Makes a big. It just makes a big difference with Miami, Ohio. That's all.
Fair enough. If anybody's still watching and has any questions on the bubble in general, we are happy to answer those while we go through these last couple of rounds of votes. It is interesting looking at all these teams together, right? There's a lot of Ohio State 8-11, quad 1 and 2, Texas 8-11, SMU 8-11, Virginia Tech 8-11, Santa Clara 8-6. Granted, they didn't play as many quad 1A games as those other teams, but I feel like that kind of sets them apart a little bit.
Well, like usual, the bubble teams from smaller conferences usually have to break right for them. Or they have to earn it themselves. So, Santa Clara has a big chance. Obviously, they're going to get St. Mary's again. So beating them, a second time would be huge for their profile. I think they could be in a hard spot if they lose. I think what Rocco was pointing out is they would end up 1-4 or 1-5 against that group if they lost to St. Mary's again. So that would be kind of a tough.
1-4, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a little bit, a tough ask at that point potentially.
I should point out that in 2022, San Francisco went 0-5 against those two and got a 10 seed.
Yeah, that's true.
But they didn't lose to Loyola Chicago either, though. That was true.
I'm just saying because the other thing that could happen is they could be in and then they could get their spot taken from them. That's what gets hard. That's what gets hard.
Speaking of being in, Iowa might need to win that game at Nebraska to feel safe headed into the tournament. They just lost.
I missed the final 5 seconds of that game. Damn it. What happened?
I don't know. Michigan won by 3.
The Iowa fans were all over me today for having them so low. Like they're in my next 4 buys, and they're a little bit above like the last 2 teams in my last 4 buys. But I got a lot of crap from them today. But I'm like, guys, it's not a done deal here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, they're one of those resumes where, to the kind of what Rocco was talking about a few minutes ago, if it's a selection question, I have more selection questions for them than I do seeding questions. If it's seeding, I feel pretty decent about them. But selection, I wouldn't test losing both Nebraska and the first Big Ten game if I were them.
No, when your best wins are against Indiana twice.
We've got Miami, Ohio, Ohio State, Texas, and Texas A&M moving into the field as the 39th through 42nd teams. I would echo what Matt said about Iowa fans. I love them. They're passionate, but I also did when Graham originally sent me his Venmo like QR code or whatever, and I don't have Venmo. That's why we're using Graham's here. But I asked, like, is that just for donations, or can they like request that you make them pay you or whatever? I was like, because the Iowa fans are coming for us if they're allowed to demand money from us.
Oh, I'm well aware. Yes.
All right, let me fiddle with the spreadsheet here.
Barty is getting all they can ask for here from Rutgers.
Oh shit, that got interesting again.
They're gonna come up short, but
Yeah.
Oh, I guess South Florida, Memphis is right now. Didn't realize that.
Yeah. You don't see it too often, but you have to wonder a little bit if that Rutgers game. I know Michigan State had a big lead early. That's the quintessential home trap game, right? Because you got Michigan coming in this weekend, and you're just coming off a big win, and
Do,
2 point.
do you guys
2 point
still have
game.
that's a 2-point
the Michigan
game.
Iowa game
2 point
on?
game.
Or as Johnson just standing behind Dusty May?
To Michigan State, for not their credit, but maybe their luck, if you're going to have a trap game, it's good to be Rutgers instead of a team that can actually beat you.
Well, it's a 2 point game, Graham. Don't jinx us here.
I would love to jinx Michigan State in this scenario. Great. I'm one of those guys that
4 seconds to go.
chaos. Yeah, we talked about it earlier. I want the chaos. I want the crazy bracket that I have to make split-second decisions on.
Same, Graham.
That was is anyone actually watching that game? Did you see what Rutgers just did? That's crazy. They had 4 seconds left, and they went for the trap instead of actually fouling immediately. They let a second and a half run off. That was very strange. But it's also why Rutgers is 12-17.
All right, I'm going to propose that this is our final vote on these 9 teams. Whoever finishes at the bottom of this vote does not get in.
Perfect.
I think we already kind of decided that San Diego State, Seton Hall, Oklahoma State, none of them are in right now. We're basically just picking one team to be left out, essentially. And I think the other 8 will put in, and that will be. So this right now, from these 9 teams, we are theoretically picking our last 4 in and our first 4 out, and picking one team to be left in the lurch. What's funny is when, a decade ago, when our godfather Tim Kruger and I did the mock selection committee together, and he and I talk about it frequently, that there was a point where they were saying they won't scrub the bubble teams when it gets down to this point. Whoever wins this, I mean, if they were doing seeding, but this was a decade ago, once they had decided who was going to be going to Dayton, those teams could not move. They couldn't fall out. They couldn't raise up, and they would decide that on Friday. And I've told Tim before, that's when we instantly became friends, because we locked eyes like Charlie Kelly and Mac across the restaurant. How can you do that? That makes no sense. And Mike Tirico was there too, and he was like, "What are you people talking about?" But
That's amazing.
Yeah, they didn't change that rule till later on that you could. It used to be based on the last 4 selections into the field.
Right.
And I think it, to me, speaks to the power of committees, right? Sometimes we forget that. We're like, why don't they just move this team here, move this team here? It's a committee. They're very procedural. They have 12 people in the room, 12 people trying to make decisions. They all want to get their word in, their thoughts in. They're just going to be slow moving naturally because they're a 12-person committee.
And it just went to 12 a couple of years ago. It used to be 10, so it's even.
Yeah, it used to be 10.
Yeah.
And that was also, oh man, that must have been 2015 or 2016, whatever it was. That was when I asked if anybody can game the system. It was really tough call between, I think, Gonzaga and Wisconsin for the last 1 seed. And I was like, if you wanted to put, if you really wanted Gonzaga in that spot, if you filled out your ballot, could you put Wisconsin at 1 overall and Gonzaga at 8 overall to skew the numbers? And Dan Gavitt stood up. He's like, no, that can't happen. We have procedures in place to block that from gaming the system or whatever. So That was also the year that Dan Gavitt like yelled at me because I was in charge of the I think I was in charge of the WCC and BYU was in it at the time, and I kept bringing up like, oh, they played well. They only lost by 1. It was a close game. The predictive Ken Palm loves them, and he was like, that would never get brought up in the committee room. How times have changed. Michigan State survived. All right, I should fill out my vote, huh? And then we can wrap up. So clearly I like Auburn best of all these teams, don't I? Yeah. VCU's in there. Anybody got any fun anecdotes to share?
My son is 7 years old, and he's been asking questions about bracket stuff lately. Like, okay, what are you doing tonight, or what's this mean when you list teams out? So I'm like, I might have something here. I tell my wife, like, we might have ourselves a guy, maybe in a couple 3 years, who might really be interested in this, because when they're 7 years old, for those you have kids, like they're just so inquisitive about everything, and this kid is just he's very much soaking in right now. So I am a very happy dad about that. Let me tell you.
That's pretty cool.
Love it.
Dad, tell me about the KPI again.
My 7-year-old daughter will look at the whiteboard when I have it up on the wall. She's like, oh, you updated it. But she's like obsessed with where George Mason is. She's like, where's George Mason? I was like, oh, honey, they're gone. All right. I think we have our vote, and Cincinnati is the one left out. Again, this is theoretically our last 4 in, first 4 out, and we are going to revisit this as needed on Sunday, but these will be our 50 teams that we are seeding tomorrow night. It'll be a joy to get into talking about UConn and Florida after talking about Auburn and Indiana. Any parting thoughts from anyone?
Don't expand the field.
No.
Agreed.
Oh, there is an interesting question on the chat before we go. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this. When is there going to be a decision on whether Utah Valley is eligible?
Well, right now they have a TRO until
but it expires before the WAC tournament ends, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So they're going to look to get it extended. I think that's what's going to happen. And so we'll play it out with them, but I would just count on Utah Valley being in. They're not going to not be in.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
All right, boys. This was fun. Same time tomorrow. We'll do seeding Friday. We're skipping Saturday because we're just going to be watching basketball then, like all of you. And then at some point on Sunday, we'll be back for some scrubbing and some bracketing. But thanks for everybody who hung in there. I think we relatively stuck to the schedule. Rocco, we got you out in time. You can do your New Mexico call at 11.
Okay, perfect.
But until tomorrow night, take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
All right.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Thanks, guys.